Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Nathan and Krystal Maddox. In Colmesneil, a small town in Tyler County, Texas, with a population of just 563 people. Nathan Maddox and Kristen Westfall's relationship progressed quickly. They lived on nearby streets and shared milestones like their first love and first kiss. Despite their strong bond, Kristen's parents disapproved and tried to end the relationship. Torn between her love and her parents, Kristen initially chose her family. However, everything changed when she discovered she was pregnant. Faced with this reality, her parents decided to accept the situation and permitted the couple to marry, as single motherhood was socially unacceptable. Nathan and Kristen got married in Texas. Shortly after, they bought a house and welcomed their first child, a daughter named Madison. However, family life wasn't as idyllic as in the movies. Nathan had to work hard to support them. Owning and maintaining a house was expensive. So he took a job in Montana, away from home. As a young husband and father, he tried to visit Kristen and Madison as often as possible. He regularly sent money home, believing that he had a happy family waiting for him. He loved Kristen and Madison and thought they were the perfect little family. One day, when he returned home from Montana, he immediately noticed the house was empty. Most of the belongings were gone, and there was a note on the kitchen table. In a few brief lines, Kristen informed that she was leaving. Her reason seemed odd. She claimed she didn't know where her husband was, who he was with, or when he would return. She wrote that she was unhappy, but this was untrue because Kristen knew Nathan was in Montana for work. He called regularly to check on her and their daughter, and he sent them money regularly. The most painful part was that she took Madison with her, and Nathan was now forbidden from seeing his daughter. Kristen did something very unkind. She went to the police station and provided false information to gain full custody of her daughter, claiming that the child's father was not supportive or interested. Nathan was aware that his ex-wife and daughter had moved back to her parents' home. He made several attempts to visit his daughter Madison, but the Westfall family was firm in their refusal. They were happy to have gotten rid of an unwanted son-in-law. As time went by, Nathan moved back to his hometown to be closer to his daughter. He continued his efforts to see her and understood that he needed to work with a lawyer to gain official custody and arrange legal visitations. During this challenging time, he met with Krystal again. They had known each other since childhood, having attended school together. As teenagers, their lives took different paths. Krystal moved to the big city, dreaming of graduating from university. However, in her final year, she got married. Instead of pursuing a successful career, she enjoyed a happy family life and had 4 children. Unfortunately, over time, her marriage deteriorated, leading to a divorce. In 2011, Krystal returned to her hometown with her children. Krystal and Nathan, longtime friends, reunited at a crucial moment for both. Nathan was captivated by Krystal's children and admired how she interacted with them. Her boundless energy and optimism lit up everything around her, like a fairy. Nathan and Krystal got married in 2013. Nathan worked at the Lack and Industries warehouse, while Krystal started a small clothing business, opening a children's clothing boutique under her own name and selling handmade jewelry. The business was doing very well, which allowed them to afford a good lawyer to seek visitation rights or custody of Nathan's daughter from his first marriage. Madison was delighted with her father's new wife and her new siblings, and she felt completely happy in her father's home. This made Lita and Paula Westfall, Kristen's parents, very resentful and worried about losing their only granddaughter. In 2012, Kristen Westfall requested full custody of her daughter in court. With her parents' support, the custody battle dragged on for 2 long years. The Westfall family was hoping to gain full custody quickly, but Krystal's arrival in Nathan's life changed the whole situation. A complete family, a home, and a good job made a strong case in court, and Nathan was granted visitation rights with his daughter. In October 2013, the judge allowed Nathan and Krystal to have supervised visits with Madison. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Krystal arrived at Mount Carmel Church for the Sunday service. After the service, they wanted to take a walk with Madison, who was 6 years old. They left the church a little ahead of the rest of the congregation to go get some gifts they had prepared for Madison from their car. A few minutes later, 3 loud gunshots rang out. Nathan and Krystal were tragically killed by gunshots to the head, shocking their small town with the brutal murder of them. Initially, the killings seemed senseless, but later investigations revealed a motive. The police conducted a thorough investigation at the scene, where they found a .30 caliber rifle and matching shell casings. The autopsy of Nathan showed he was also shot in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun. This discovery led investigators to believe there were 2 shooters, since it's unlikely that one person could have managed both weapons simultaneously. The investigators carried out a set of interviews with witnesses to collect information about the Maddox family and to understand what occurred. They spoke with church members, friends, and relatives of the deceased family. However, the most surprising aspect was the response from Nathan's ex-wife's family. Both Kristen and her parents, along with other witnesses, were summoned to give testimony at the police station. The attitude of this family really shocked the investigators. The Westfalls played up the tragedy so much that it seemed like they were hiding their happiness about the deaths. Paul Westfall was so stunned that he had a fit. He couldn't believe the news of Nathan's death and had to call emergency services. A grown man who spent years trying to cut Nathan out of his daughter's life was so devastated he suffered a seizure. Kristen was the first person interviewed, and her interview was somewhat unsettling. She was the only family member who remained calm and composed, even though she and Nathan had been together for a long time and had a child. Kristen shared some strange details about him, focusing only on the negative aspects of her ex-husband. She claimed to know who killed him, mentioning that Nathan was involved with dangerous motorcycle gangs in Montana. One day, one of the alleged gang members showed up at Nathan's mother's house and threatened to kill him. Although the story was partly true, the threat didn't materialize because a motorcyclist inadvertently broke his bike. It was also found out that the existence of the gang had been exaggerated to throw off the investigation. Moreover, as an alibi, Kristen stated that on the day of the crime she was at the supermarket with her dad, Paul, just a few miles from the church, and then they both went home. Surveillance footage at 10:57 a.m. confirmed they were at the supermarket. Paul Westfall told exactly the same story. However, because Paul was a hunter and owned a firearm, they tested his hands for gunshot residue, but the results were negative. Still, his reaction to Nathan's death, whom he openly hated, seemed very strange to the investigators, leaving them slightly doubtful about his sincerity. Interviews with Nathan's loved ones over a short period revealed that he was in a custody battle with his ex-wife Kristen Westfall and her family over their daughter. After a long and bitter court dispute, Nathan was close to gaining custody, which the Westfall family strongly opposed. This intense conflict could have led to retaliation, but the police lacked concrete evidence to arrest anyone from the Westfall family. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 of them could be the shooters. Investigators were still not convinced by their story and were trying to determine which family member fired the shots that killed 2 people. Regardless of whether it was a hired assassin, the investigators took a different approach and decided to focus on the main figure of the controversy, little Madison. After all, her safety was at risk, and she was still with a family that could be dangerous to her. Police officers and Child Protective Services, CPS, arrived to take the girl from the Westfalls' home, but were met with strong protests and anger. Due to the actions of the older Westfall family members, a search of the house was conducted. During this search, the police made a shocking discovery. A gun was stored on a shelf in a room where it could be easily reached. The search concluded with the discovery of illegal drugs throughout the house. In 2013, Kristen Westfall was charged and arrested for possessing a controlled substance. She faced repeated arrests, suggesting she couldn't be a fit mother to Madison. When Kristen went to jail in early 2013, her parents were given temporary custody of her daughter and did not permit Nathan to visit Madison during this period. Kristen defied Child Protective Services orders and continued living in the same house and sharing a bed with her young daughter. Even in 2014, despite court injunctions, she remained with her family and saw her daughter daily, disregarding the court's directive to move out. In March 2014, Child Protective Services got involved in the custody case of Madison, less than 2 months after the tragic murder in front of the church. Authorities arrested 4 people: Kristen Westfall, 29, her younger brother Cameron, and their parents, Paul and Letha Westfall. There was no direct evidence of their guilt in murder. The interrogations didn't yield the expected results, so the police resorted to deceptive tactics to pressure the most vulnerable member of the Westfall family, 18-year-old Cameron. If his guilt was proven, he was told that all his family members would face life imprisonment and the direct perpetrators of the murder would receive the death penalty. Cameron was young and kind-hearted. He was really scared and quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, revealing all the details of what had happened. The crime against Nathan and Krystal turned out to be meticulously planned by the Westfall family to completely exclude Nathan from the role of a father. The Westfalls were worried and carefully planned a scheme to keep Nathan out of Madison's life. Nathan wanted to take care of his daughter on his own, but the Westfalls were unwilling to let him see her, much less grant him permanent custody. The Westfalls were really upset that their ex-son-in-law had gotten his life together and was living well. So, when the judge allowed him multiple visits, it became clear that he might win the case. This led Kristen to come up with a plan to get rid of him once and for all. Initially, Kristen tried to hire someone to kill her ex-husband, but when that didn't work out, she decided to do it herself with her father. On Sunday afternoon, the family usually attended church, and January 18th was no different. Letha Westfall and little Madison drove to the service at the scheduled time. Afterward, Letha had to hand Madison over to her father. Meanwhile, Kristen and Paul went to a distant store and pretended to be customers to appear on CCTV cameras, trying to establish a solid alibi, but they miscalculated the timing. Each family member had a specific role to fulfill. Throughout the entire period, they communicated via text messages, updating each other on Nathan and Krystal's movements. Letha, who attended the service, informed Paul when Nathan and Krystal were about to leave the church. She also the one who called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron played a key role in hiding the evidence. He disposed of the gun used by his sister and father to shoot the newlyweds in the head near a remote church. He drove to a lake and threw away a bag of weapons. Cameron later decided to cooperate with the authorities and revealed that Kristen initially came up with the plan, which the family followed. He also showed investigators the spot where he had thrown away the murder weapons. Divers eventually recovered these items, confirming Cameron's statement. The police arrested Kristen, Cameron, and their parents, Paul and Letha Westfall, charging them with organized crime. Kristen and Paul fired the shots, while Cameron and Letha willingly assisted them. Since Letha was at the church during the incident, she clearly did not shoot Nathan and Krystal Maddox. However, phone records revealed that she informed her daughter and spouse of the couple's location as they left the church. Although Kristen and Paul pulled the trigger, Letha and her son Cameron were knowingly involved in the crime. The trial was noisy and prolonged. Each Westfall family member was tried individually. Paul Westfall pretended to have seizures and was deemed mentally unfit, staying in a state psychiatric hospital for evaluation. In May 2014, a judge ruled Paul incompetent, but this decision was reversed 4 months later. Facing with threat the death penalty for the murders of Nathan and Krystal Maddox, Paul and Letha accepted a plea deal with the district attorney's office to avoid execution. Paul accepted a plea deal from the prosecution, resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole after pleading guilty to the charges. Letha also accepted a plea deal and admitted to participating in organized criminal activity, avoiding a trial. She is currently imprisoned at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville and will be eligible for parole in 2044. At the time of her sentencing, Letha Westfall was 54 years old, which means she may spend the rest of her life in prison. Kristen is the third person from the Westfall family to be tried in this case. During the trial, she maintained her innocence against all charges. She claimed that her entire family was unstable, and she was the only one honest about it. When her family members, Letha, Paul, and Cameron, testified against her in court, she couldn't confront them directly. Kristen Westfall's final trial and sentencing started in August 2016. The reason for killing Nathan and Krystal was related to the custody of Madison. Kristen strongly opposed Nathan having unrestricted access to see Madison. She couldn't bear the thought of him being happy. Kristen wanted to manage the communication between her daughter and Nathan herself. Through their daughter, she aimed to control everything he did and felt. The trial lasted more than a week. Ultimately, with overwhelming evidence against her, the jury took 8 hours to find her guilty of capital murder. In a Brazos County courtroom, attorneys and the judge reviewed final motions for the woman. Kristen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, nearly 9 months before her father pleaded guilty and received the same sentence in May 2017. Kristen Westfall is currently serving her sentence at the William Hobby Women's Prison in Falls County, Texas. Paul, Letha, and Kristen Westfall were charged with 2 counts of murder. However, the youngest family member, Cameron, was only charged with 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Cameron pleaded guilty to 2 counts of third-degree evidence tampering. The judge postponed his sentencing based on Cameron's agreement to testify against his family. He could face up to 10 years in prison for each charge. He was reportedly not involved in the shooting, and his mother was not involved either, as she was at the church when the crime happened. However, phone records indicate that she texted her husband and daughter while the Maddoxes were getting ready to go home. Cameron is currently imprisoned at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Huntsville, Texas, and is expected to be released in 2025. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Clayton. Kelly Clayton, also known as Kelly Stage Clayton, resides in Cotone, New York. Kelly Clayton had a promising life ahead of her. In high school, she was an exemplary student, excelling academically and serving as a role model for her peers. Her academic achievements were impressive, and she passed exams with ease. Despite her academic focus, Kelly's appearance was often described as model-like, and she could have pursued a career in modeling if she had chosen to do so. Following high school, Kelly enrolled in a teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, which brought immense pride to her parents. However, after a few years, Kelly suddenly lost interest in her studies. It is unclear what triggered this change, but she eventually withdrew from the university and informed her parents that she no longer wanted to pursue a teaching career. Kelly felt that she was too young to be confined to a life of grading notebooks and managing classrooms. Instead, she expressed a desire to travel and experience life to the fullest. Her parents were disappointed and upset by her decision, leading to a 6-month estrangement from their daughter. Kelly's life took an unexpected turn when she met Tom Clayton at a party hosted by mutual friends. Tom was immediately smitten with Kelly and began showering her with attention. His athletic physique and attractive appearance made him a standout, which wasn't surprising given his successful hockey career. As a semi-professional player for the Jackal team, Tom was known for his strength and aggression on the ice. However, he realized his hockey career would eventually end due to physical limitations. Tom would have to retire and enjoy the game from the sidelines, either by attending live matches or watching his favorite team on television. They continued with their lives, starting by returning to New York to get married. They then moved to North Carolina and eventually settled in the small town of Cato, which had only a few thousand residents. Tom started a franchise that specialized in rebuilding houses damaged by fires or disasters. He also worked for a friend's company in a related field. Kelly, on the other hand, had dropped out of university and was working as a waitress. Although she changed jobs, she continued to work even after having 2 children. Tom's income was sufficient for the family, and Kelly could have quit her job to care for their daughters, but she chose to continue working to earn extra money. She used this extra income to buy toys and pamper her children. On September 28, 2015, Tom went to play poker with his friends, the Millers, as he usually did. He preferred to attend these gatherings alone, as playing for money required a certain level of skill and experience. Additionally, someone had to stay home with the children, and bringing the whole family would have turned the evening into a noisy and chaotic affair, detracting from the enjoyment of the game. That evening, Tom was on a losing streak, but instead of giving up, he tried to win back his losses. He suggested that anyone who wanted to stay and play until morning was welcome to do so, but no one took him up on the offer, and he ended up going home. At home, a horrific scene unfolded before Tom's eyes. His wife lay in a pool of her own blood, severely beaten and, at first glance, appeared lifeless. Panicked, Tom frantically searched the rooms for his children. Fortunately, they were unharmed but terrified. He quickly scooped up his daughters and rushed to his neighbor Derek's house, desperate to shield them from the gruesome sight of their mother's battered body. From Derek's house, Tom called the police, struggling to process the chaos. The officer who arrived at the scene found Tom kneeling beside his wife's body, attempting to administer CPR. However, the emergency medical technicians soon intervened and pulled Tom away, revealing the devastating truth: Kelly had been deceased for an extended period, and nothing could be done to revive her. The house was in disarray, with blood covering both floors. The bedroom showed signs of an intense struggle between Kelly and her killer, who carried out the brutal act despite the presence of children in the house. It appeared Kelly had been pushed down the stairs, as evidenced by the broken banister, and brutally beaten with a blunt object until the killer was certain she was dead. No signs of knife or gunshot wounds were found. The officer filming the crime scene observed that Tom seemed lost and in shock. He wandered aimlessly, briefly entering the room before exiting, and was unable to provide the officer with basic information, such as the location of the children's room or the emergency exit. However, when asked about his whereabouts during the murder, Tom calmly stated he had spent the evening at a friend's house playing poker. The officer, failing to obtain clear information from Tom, proceeded to question the neighbor and the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, described the perpetrator as a robber. According to Charlie, she and her sister were drifting off to sleep when they heard their mother scream loudly from the next room. Their mother yelled, "Charlie, run away from here," and then the whole house shook violently. They cautiously left their room and saw the perpetrator leaning over their mother, beating her with what looked like a hammer. They ran back into the nursery, blocked the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. Fortunately, the perpetrator wasn't looking for them, as the nightstand wouldn't have been enough to stop him. When asked to describe the perpetrator, Charlie said he was big, like a bear. He wore blue jeans, a black shirt, and a mask similar to the one her father wears when hunting. Charlie also noted that the perpetrator's eyes looked like her father's, but she didn't remember anything else, as she only caught a brief glimpse before getting scared and running away. Police officers investigating the house couldn't find evidence to support her claim that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, but the garage gate was open, which could have been an entry point. However, nothing was stolen from the house, including jewelry and cash, and the cabinets were all closed. This was unusual, as burglars typically search every area. Officers quickly suspected that Tom, was involved in the murder. They believed he was pretending to be a grieving husband and had actually killed his wife to collect insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, Tom could potentially receive up to $1 million. The police just needed to gather evidence to solve the case, especially since the daughter mentioned that the perpetrator's mask and eyes resembled her father's. However, the police couldn't find the hunting mask in the house. After discovering Tom's whereabouts on the night in question, the police interviewed the other poker players. One of Tom's friends was incredulous. "You think Tom is the killer? That's unbelievable. His wife was just murdered, and instead of finding the real culprit, you're focusing on him." Another friend, less emotional, chimed in, "Tom couldn't have done it. He worked 2 jobs non-stop because he loved Kelly and their kids. It's just not possible. Besides, he was with us the entire night, playing poker. Even when everyone else was tired, he wanted to keep playing." Laura, an acquaintance of Tom's, shared her concerns during a break in the game. She recalled that Tom had asked to borrow her phone, claiming he had left his in the car, which was only 10 meters away. Laura found this odd but lent him her phone anyway. Tom stepped outside to make the call, but when Laura checked her phone's call history later, there was no record of the call, suggesting that Tom had deleted it. Laura discussed this incident with her husband, who had been sitting next to Tom at the poker table. He noticed that Tom wasn't paying attention to the game, instead keeping his head down, focusing on something on the table. It turned out that Tom had his phone with him the whole time, which raised more questions. Why did Tom borrow Laura's phone if he had his own? Who was he trying to call, and why couldn't he use his own phone? After Laura's testimony, the police re-questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and she reiterated that the robber resembled her father. The next testimony came from the niece of Kelly. She explained that she hadn't told her Aunt Kelly about Tom's true nature because she didn't want to upset Kelly. Aunt Kelly adored Tom. The niece felt her truth wasn't needed, implying that it wouldn't change anything. The niece saw Tom as a person with 2 sides. On the surface, he appeared caring and attentive, often showering Aunt Kelly with attention and gifts, and even helping with childcare, which is more than many fathers do. However, his behavior at work revealed a completely different personality. Recognizing her niece's concerns about being young and alone, Aunt Kelly had set up a job for her with Tom the previous summer. During her employment, the niece handled tasks such as correspondence, registration, and managing documents. At first, her interactions with Tom were strictly professional, mainly because she didn't know him well before working for him. One day, Tom got drunk and came to the office, revealing to the niece that his family life was a facade. He confessed to loving his daughters, but not his wife, Aunt Kelly. He had been unfaithful, having multiple affairs during their marriage, and considered leaving her but stayed due to financial concerns. It was later also confirmed by female participants of a poker game that Tom was indeed unfaithful, having relationships with 2 women present at the game. Additionally, Kelly's 16-year-old niece shared information about Michael Beard, another employee of Tom's firm. Michael was doing repair work on houses after a fire, but there were frequent reports of items going missing from the houses where he worked. Tom initially doubted his customers when they accused Michael Beard of theft during fire restoration jobs. However, as the complaints continued, it became clear that Michael was indeed stealing from clients. Additionally, there were allegations of Michael showing up to work intoxicated. When Tom finally confronted Michael about his behavior, he was understandably upset and disappointed. Despite having every right to be angry, Tom took a surprisingly compassionate approach. Instead of simply firing Michael and cutting ties, Tom actively reached out to other companies and recommended Michael for a job. When none of those opportunities panned out, Tom took it a step further and offered Michael work around his own house, doing odd jobs like cutting the grass, watering plants, and making minor repairs. This decision showed that Tom was willing to give Michael a second chance, even if it meant finding alternative employment for his former employee. The detective brought Michael Beard in for questioning. Michael claimed he only stole because he and his family were in dire need of money. He expressed his gratitude towards Tom, his former employer, who had always defended him. Michael also praised Tom's wife, who had shown kindness by feeding him and giving his children old clothes. However, the investigation took a turn when Michael's wife, Holly, was interrogated. She revealed that Tom had offered Michael a job, which Michael had not mentioned earlier, and promised to pay him $10,000 for it. This new information raised suspicions about Michael's alibi. He was called back to the station and hooked up to a lie detector. The test results indicated that Michael was lying, and he eventually cracked under pressure and began to confess. The investigation was sparked by the death of Kelly, which had shaken Michael. He had even attended church to pray for her soul, showing that he was genuinely distraught by her passing. Despite initial doubts about his involvement, the police had released him after the first round of questioning. However, Holly's testimony changed everything. Tom promised Michael $10,000 to kill his wife, Kelly, and make it look like an accident. The plan was for Michael to sneak into the house while Tom was playing poker, strangle Kelly, and then start a fire to cover up the crime. The house was insured for a large sum of money. Michael found 2 cans of gasoline waiting for him in the garage, which he would use to set the fire. He quietly entered the house while everyone was asleep. He crept upstairs to Kelly's bedroom, but she was either awake or woken by the sound of the door. She saw Michael and began screaming. Kelly's screaming startled Michael, and he tried to strangle her. However, Kelly was stronger than she appeared and fought back. A fierce struggle ensued, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen. Michael was surprised by Kelly's strength, which made the fight much more intense than he had anticipated. Michael was in a state of shock and panic, flailing his arms wildly and grabbing at Kelly's clothes, unable to focus on the fight. In contrast, Kelly was fighting for her life, accurately aiming her blows at Michael's face. If the police had arrived at Michael's location sooner, they would have seen evidence of the beating he had taken. After a prolonged struggle, Michael slammed Kelly's head into the wall with great force, knocking her to the ground. She was unable to get up for some time. Michael then produced a hammer and continued to strike Kelly's head until she showed no signs of life. Consumed by rage and panic, Michael fled the house, forgetting that Tom had instructed him not only to kill Kelly but also to set fire to the house to conceal the crime. Mark Blandford, Michael's accomplice, was just the driver. Knowing Michael from working together and staying with him, Mark had not been surprised when Michael, known for petty theft, had asked him to drive during a break-in. Mark had mentioned that he had initially wanted to decline Michael's request, but that the offer of $500 had been tempting. After some deliberation, Michael had convinced him to participate. Michael's plan had been to rob a businessman, and he had needed Mark's assistance to make a quick getaway before the police arrived. Michael had also promised to help with the car. Mark had eventually agreed, but only on the condition that he could park the car at a safe distance from the house. Michael had accepted this condition. That evening, Mark had waited for Michael in the car in a dark alley, and Michael had come back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling him to move as fast as possible. Michael hadn't had any bag or sack on him, which hadn't looked much like a robbery. Mark hadn't asked him any questions along the way, simply because he hadn't wanted to know anything. He had just wanted his $500, which he hadn't ended up getting. On the way out, Michael had asked Mark to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of there. Mark had stopped there, and Michael had hastily stripped off his outer garments and thrown them off the bridge. Mark had offered to show the place if needed. Indeed, police officers who had arrived on the scene at Mark's behest had found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Michael had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. Tom denied ordering the massacre of his wife, claiming Michael acted alone. According to Tom, Michael knew Tom had money and was motivated by resentment over losing his job. Tom suggested Michael robbed his house, unaware Kelly was home, resulting in her death. However, Laura, a woman who played poker with Tom, revealed that Tom used her cell phone to make a call. The detective obtained the call records, confirming suspicions. The records showed Tom called Michael on the night of September 28th to 29th. Michael was tried first and maintained he was hired to set fire to the house for insurance purposes. He claimed he didn't kill Kelly and the blood on his clothes came from touching her dead body. He had disposed of his belongings to avoid suspicion of being at the Claytons' house that night. His testimony seemed convincing. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts against Michael Beard, who now faced life imprisonment. In contrast, Tom's lawyers managed to gather records of conversations and correspondence between Tom and Michael, but none of these clearly mentioned their nefarious plan. Furthermore, the prosecution's attempts to obtain billing transcripts of Tom's movements yielded no concrete evidence. All the evidence against Tom was circumstantial. However, one key detail caught the attention of investigators. The car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. Moreover, on the day of the incident, Tom had arrived at the office in his personal Toyota but then switched to the company's pickup truck, which was later driven to Michael's house and left there. The truck was returned to the office the day after the tragedy. This suggested that Tom had, in fact, provided Michael with the car that he and Mark used to commit the crime. It was a crucial piece of evidence that the jury testified to during the trial. The 6-day trial concluded with the jury finding Tom guilty of hiring Michael to commit the heinous crime. Michael subsequently appealed, using the testimony of young Charlie, who claimed that the eyes behind the mask belonged to her father. However, the court dismissed the appeal due to the matching description of the clothing found under the bridge. Consequently, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard were sentenced to life in prison. Mark received a 4-year prison sentence for manslaughter. The custody of Tom and Kelly's children was awarded to Kelly's sister, Kim. With time, Charlie has learned to cope with the tragedy. Although she occasionally remembers her mother, she refuses to discuss her father, whom she will never want to see again. It's hard to surprise police officers who work with the most egregious criminal elements, but sometimes meanness and cynicism cross all acceptable limits. This occurred once in the careers of New York City Police Department officers who had been on job for over 20 years, dealing with the underworld. It was a case of staggering ingenuity. They had never seen anything like it. On September 2, 2016, police received a call from a victim, a 35-year-old woman, reporting that she'd been robbed. When police officers arrived at her home, Olga Svik, an immigrant from Ukraine who works as a beauty therapist, reported several valuable items missing from her bedroom. She told the arriving patrol officers that she had just been to the hospital because she felt very ill. She was suffering from severe dizziness and nausea. The woman periodically lost consciousness, and even upon returning from the medical facility, seemed somewhat disoriented. In gathering details about the incident, the police interviewed Olga extensively. From her last unpleasant encounters, she recalled a client who came to her house demanding urgent eyelash extensions, Victoria Nerova. Victoria had visited the salon before and increasingly acted brazenly as if she and Olga were friends. She was always imposing, but on that day was particularly insistent. Olga replied that she only did such work in the salon and did not accept clients at home. However, it was useless to explain this to Victoria. She did not give in, so Olga had to agree to accept her at home. The victim also mentioned refusing previous social invitations from Victoria, which were persistently offered by her friend. There was another intriguing detail. Victoria bore a strong resemblance to Olga, which always confused the beauty therapist. During the interview, it emerged that on that day, Victoria showed up at Olga's apartment with 3 pieces of cheesecake from a well-regarded local pastry shop. Victoria ate 2 slices with gusto while there. This unusual confluence of events baffled even seasoned New York City police officers. It truly stood out in their extensive experience battling criminal antics in the city. Olga was persuaded to take the 3rd piece of cheesecake after a brief tea gathering. Not long after Victoria had departed, Olga began to feel intensely nauseated and fainted, remaining unconscious for approximately 30 minutes. Upon regaining consciousness, she immediately called 911 and was transported to the hospital by ambulance. Despite thorough blood tests, nothing unusual was detected. Once she returned home, Olga noticed several valuables were missing. She promptly went to the police to report the theft. Initially, the police were skeptical of her story and suspected that she might have been under the influence of illegal substances, given her strange behavior and lethargic appearance. Detectives concluded that her account involving a female doppelganger was fabricated. However, Olga steadfastly denied taking any substances and defended her account convincingly. She asserted that the cheesecake she consumed caused her illness, believing it might have been laced with something harmful. Law enforcement officers conducted a quick inspection of Olga's apartment and discovered a box from a local bakery in the trash can. Olga confirmed this box contained the cheesecake from her meeting with Victoria. The box was taken as evidence due to baking residue left inside. Forensic analysis didn't reveal anything suspicious on it. Despite these findings, Olga remained adamant that the cheesecake was responsible for her condition. She cited her hospitalization and subsequent medical examinations as proof, but acknowledged that none had found any harmful substances in her system. When law enforcement contacted the medical facility to inquire about Olga's condition and test results, doctors refused to disclose information due to patient confidentiality policies. This refusal reinforced police skepticism regarding Olga's claims. The investigation faced further challenges because they couldn't locate Victoria, whom Olga had mentioned. Consequently, the case was stalled until new information emerged from a neighbor who mentioned seeing a suspicious woman at Olga's apartment on the next day following the incident. This woman appeared several times at the beauty master's apartment, hanging around until she came face to face with her neighbor. The strange woman mentioned that her friend, Olga, was sick and quickly left the premises. The neighbor noticed that Olga's apartment door was ajar and glanced to check on her. The space was unbearably stuffy. The heating was on full blast despite the 30-degree summer heat. Olga was found alive but unconscious. She was lying on her bed in an unusual combination of clothing, revealing underwear paired with warm sports pants. Detectives surmised that someone had deliberately attempted to change Olga's clothes. Scattered around were pills containing a potent drug, suggesting that Olga might have taken them with the intent of harming herself. A neighbor immediately contacted 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive, and bearing a striking resemblance to Olga. Upon learning new details, investigators became convinced that this doppelganger was not a product of Olga's imagination. Thus, they pursued the case more aggressively. Everything in the apartment appeared to be staged to depict a suicide. Detectives suspected Victoria Nerova, a regular cheesecake customer, of being involved. However, they had no leads or information about Victoria's identity or photograph. Later, a private detective, a former police officer, approached the department with valuable insights. He had been investigating this con artist's violent activities for some time and had already tracked Victoria online, where she advertised escort services on a dating site and social media platforms. The private investigator believed that Victoria used these online promotions to locate victims for her crimes effectively. Her method seemed flawless. She would visit the homes of clients and then drug them with psychoactive substances so they would lose consciousness. After that, she would take everything of value and then go into hiding. This activity might have stayed hidden indefinitely if not for this tragic circumstance. Meanwhile, Olsvik finally recovered from the unpleasant events. After being discharged from the hospital, she shared on her social networks about the poisoning incident. One of her clients unexpectedly mentioned knowing a man named Ruben Barakov who had a similar experience. Ruben, the owner of a dry cleaner, had met Victoria Nasarova on a Russian dating site a couple of months before Olga's cheesecake poisoning. The new acquaintance invited Ruben to her home, boasting about her culinary skills. He agreed and went to her place. However, as soon as he tasted the dishes, he lost consciousness. She emptied his pockets, taking expensive watches, money, and cards. Under the influence of a strong psychoactive substance, Ruben sincerely believes it almost killed him. Later, when he started regaining consciousness, Victoria took him to his dry cleaners and told his colleagues he was drunk before leaving. Only then did Ruben realize he had been robbed. The private investigator thought the situation was very serious and considered both victims very lucky. In 2017, the investigator worked with a client from Russia to track down an elusive criminal. Nadia Ford turned to him after the disappearance of her mother, Alla Alexenko. Nadia lived in New York, but was born in Russia and originally from Khadar. Her mother Alla raised Nadia and her brother alone under challenging circumstances, working 5 jobs to provide for them. Nadia always dreamed of living in the USA. Her dream came true in 2007 when she went there to study. In America, she met a man whom she married and took his last name, Ford. However, their marriage did not work out and they divorced. Despite this setback, Nadia stayed and settled successfully in the United States while maintaining close relations with her mother. Alla sold her house because it became difficult to maintain and moved into an apartment. In early 2013, Nadia's mother welcomed a new neighbor, Victoria Nerova. Despite the significant age gap, Victoria quickly became friends with Nadia's mother. This friendship struck many as unusual. Nadia's mother, Alla, often talked about her daughter living in the United States. Inspired by these conversations, Victoria got the idea to visit the US and meet Alla's daughter. Alla arranged the meeting, and in September 2013, Victoria flew to New York. There, she met Nadia and established a close relationship with her. To Nadia, her mother's friend appeared to be a kind and pleasant woman. Victoria frequently asked about ways to stay in the US, receiving advice from Nadia on several occasions. Unfortunately, Victoria's plans fell through and she returned to Russia. Nevertheless, she maintained close communication with Alla. In the fall of 2014, Victoria planned another trip to America and informed Alla about it. She even offered to deliver gifts to Nadia if needed. The trusting Alla was pleased by this offer and requested Victoria to take money totaling over $6,000 along with valuable gifts, including 2 expensive mink fur coats to her daughter in the US. However, Victoria kept postponing her trip for various reasons. This raised concerns for Alla about whether Victoria would ever go or what would become of her valuable items. Worried, Alla called her daughter and expressed her fears. Nadia reassured her mother and suggested that she ask for her things back. On October 4, 2014, Allah called her daughter again, but this time sharing happy news. She had spoken with Victoria, who agreed to return the valuables. Yet, this did not come to pass as planned. Shortly afterward, Allah stopped answering calls, a behavior completely out of character, since they communicated daily without fail. Growing increasingly anxious, Nadia reached out to Victoria asking about her mother's whereabouts. Victoria confirmed that she had last seen Allah when they chatted over tea, but added that after their conversation ended and she left, Allah was never seen again. According to Victoria, Allah was going somewhere, but she didn't know the destination. Allah's son also tried contacting her and even visited her apartment, but his mother wasn't there. The woman never answered her calls. A few days later, the son and daughter of the missing woman got several odd text messages from an unknown number, claiming to be from their mother. These messages advised there was no need to look for her and mentioned she was happy. However, the tone of these texts didn't match Allah's usual style, raising more concerns for the children. Nadia realized something serious must have happened to her mother. She quickly booked a flight to Russia and arrived in Kodar to aid in investigating her mother's disappearance. Nadia first went to her mother's apartment but found it empty. All valuables meant for Victoria were gone too. Nadia then reported her concerns to the police, highlighting a suspicious neighbor who hadn't handed over any valuables intended for her mother. The police took interest and devised a plan. Nadia contacted Victoria and arranged a meeting. During their conversation, Nadia demanded Victoria reveal where her mother was. Victoria became agitated, shouted that Allah was alive but claimed not to know where she was, then fled to her apartment. The police officers who overheard their exchange decided to visit Victoria at home. Victoria managed to convince the investigators that she wasn't involved in the disappearance, since they had no solid evidence against her. Returning to her mother's apartment, Nadia inspected it carefully. She noticed that despite her mother's prolonged absence, the apartment was clean, as if recently tidied up meticulously. Moreover, several valuable items, including jewelry and $50, were missing from her mother's home. Nadia reported this to the police again, but they suggested that perhaps Allah had taken the money and jewelry on a trip and would come back soon. Nadia remained skeptical about this explanation and felt strongly that her mother's plight was connected somehow with Victoria. Determined not to give up, she began an active search by printing out flyers with a photo of her mother and distributing them around the neighborhood. She reached out to all her mother's friends and relatives, but no one had any idea of her whereabouts. Nadia also contacted Victoria, pleading with her to bring her mother back. She was even ready to offer a substantial reward. However, Victoria denied knowing anything. Nadia didn't lose hope and continued searching tirelessly. She visited the police regularly and checked for updates, but there was still no news of her mother's fate. Determined, she hired a private detective. The investigator discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day of the disappearance. After looking over the data on that vehicle, he found surveillance footage from October 5, 2014. The footage showed the car driving on a highway outside town with two people inside. It appeared that Victoria was behind the wheel, while in the front passenger seat sat a motionless woman who matched the description of Nadia's missing 54-year-old mother, Alla Alexenko. This discovery filled Nadia with renewed hope. Armed with this evidence, she returned to the police. Investigators verified that Victoria had indeed rented the car and called her in for questioning. During the interview, Victoria confessed to driving the car on that morning, but insisted she was alone at that time. Offered a polygraph test, Victoria agreed to take it. Despite taking the test, she was released pending final results. When those results came in, they revealed that Victoria had failed the polygraph test. She promptly became the prime suspect in the investigation. The police aimed to arrest her. However, Victoria managed to use this period of release to her advantage. She caught a flight out of the country without notifying law enforcement. Meanwhile, police intensified their search efforts for Nadia's missing mother. Nadia stayed in Russia for another 6 months, actively engaging in every aspect of the investigation process, holding on to hope that her mother was still alive and seeking help from Interpol to assist with broader search efforts. As part of their investigation, officers retraced the route taken by the rental car, which led them into a wooded area near Armavir, Victoria's hometown. The search for the missing woman began there. The daughter's hopes for her mother's safe return were dashed when the police delivered grim news in April 2015. The charred remains of a person, about 3 hours away from the missing woman's residence, were found in that wooded area. The daughter identified her mother by her dental records since the rest of the body was badly burned and unrecognizable. Unfortunately, the cause of death couldn't be determined. After an arrest warrant for Victoria Nerova was issued internationally through Interpol. However, locating the fleeing suspect took some time. Following her mother's funeral, Nadia returned to the United States and struggled to recover from the loss. Work became impossible for her until she gathered strength, vowing to seek justice for her mother and ensure those responsible would be punished. One day, while browsing the internet, Nadia stumbled upon a photo of Victoria Nerova on social media. The wanted woman was flaunting a luxurious lifestyle in Mexico. Nadia reported this to U.S. authorities, triggering their investigation into Nerova's whereabouts. It was then that Nadia hired one of America's leading private investigators, funded by a wealthy friend since she had been out of work due to her prolonged search efforts. The private detective scrutinized Victoria's social media posts and identified clues from these images. He ascertained that the fugitive had already returned to the United States. In one selfie, sunglasses reflected a car's dashboard, identified as a Chrysler 300, after exhaustive checks of multiple vehicles. Further investigation revealed that recent photos were taken in Brooklyn's Russian neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay by cross-referencing car databases. The continuous and diligent efforts led by both law enforcement and private investigators moved closer to bringing closure and justice for Nadia and her late mother. They managed to narrow down the search and locate the perpetrator despite various challenges. Eventually, they found her location. The detective she lived with her lover in a complex. Also, the Chrysler was registered to her new partner. Victoria probably didn't realize how advanced the case had become and that Interpol was searching for her globally. She posted photos online without fear, unaware that this could expose her. The detective identified the suspect's boyfriend and contacted him. It turned out he had already fallen victim to Victoria, who used a familiar poisoning tactic to escape. Tragically, she also poisoned his beagle dog, which died. This intensified public outrage towards her and increased interest in NASA's investigation. On March 20th, 2017, Victoria Nerova, 41 years old, was finally found and detained. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were relieved since leaving her free could have resulted in more victims of her crimes. During a search of Victoria's apartment, investigators found Olga Tisi's identity card. It became clear why Olga became a target. Victoria needed money and valuables, but also required a passport that looked similar to hers, since her temporary visa was about to expire. Investigators speculated that she intended to kill Olga and assume her identity completely. However, this plan failed due to a neighbor's intervention. The container holding the remnants of the poison-laced cheesecake underwent another laboratory analysis. This time, a more comprehensive test examined a wide range of substances in the baked goods, revealing a prohibited drug. The investigation uncovered that Victoria administered this drug to all her victims. Typically used as a sedative, Victoria had increased the dosage to cause her victims to pass out. Fortunately, Olga survived the cheesecake incident. The high temperature in Olga's apartment wasn't accidental. In fact, the heat significantly enhanced the effect of this drug, potentially fatal, and the perpetrator was clearly aware of this fact. Thus, she increased the heating in Olga's home and attempted to dress her warmer, but ran out of time. Upon being taken into custody, Victoria Nerova denied any involvement in Nadia's mother's disappearance and murder. She also denied any involvement in Olga's attempted murder and other similar incidents. It was revealed that Victoria had been a suspect in a fur theft case back in May 2016. However, that case never progressed. Later, several other episodes emerged where she engaged in theft. Meeting men online, traveling to their homes, spiking their drinks with drugs, and robbing them were among her methods. Most men did not report these incidents to authorities due to fear of embarrassment, allowing Victoria to evade consequences. Due to the pandemic and extensive case preparation, hearings were delayed for nearly 6 years. Finally, in January 2023, the case went to trial, garnering much media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria refused to testify or speak at all. Details about Olga's death couldn't be discussed during the trial since that crime occurred in another country. Victoria's defense emphasized there was no concrete evidence or testimony proving Nerova poisoned the cheesecake and coerced Olga into eating it. Olga testified that Victoria brought 3 pieces of cheesecake to her apartment and ate 2 herself right in front of her. So she ate 1 piece without any fear. The prosecution argued this wasn't an accident, and Victoria had added the drug to only 1 slice, knowing which one. Thus, she ate the other 2 without any hesitation and deceived Olga. After a lengthy deliberation of the case file, the jury found Victoria Nasarova guilty of attempted second-degree murder. Despite maximum sentence being 25 years in prison under Article, the judge reduced the punishment to 21 years. However, according to the law, she will be able to request parole after 15 years in prison. For the poisoner, hardship began during her 6-year wait for trial. There was no trace of the formerly beautiful and chic woman. Her rich life collapsed in an instant. Prison life proved very harsh. In detention, she constantly complained of poor nutrition and lack of proper treatment. An assault in prison left her scarred and nearly blind. Nasarova sued the prison, alleging negligence on the part of the wardens who failed to help her. The dispute was settled by paying her $325,000. In one of the interviews she gave right in prison, Victoria denied her guilt in all crimes, including Alla's murder. She claimed that she had nothing to do with poisoning Olga's cheesecake. Victoria stated that she had eaten that cheesecake herself and she was fine. She simply shared a piece with Olga but did not force her to eat it. After serving time in a United States prison, she will be deported to Russia, where she will face a trial for Alla's murder. Her daughter Nadia is very happy that Victoria is in prison and will no longer be able to escape punishment. The state of Delaware was left reeling by these events. Madison Sparrow headed out to meet her friends for ice cream on October 2, 2020, but she never returned home. Her mother immediately alerted the police. Thanks to the swift actions of the officers, disturbing details began to emerge. Madison Elizabeth Sparrow was born on September 12, 2003, in Norfolk, Virginia, USA. She was the daughter of Heather Sparrow Murphy and Richard Prestige, and had 2 sisters, Molly and Wendelin. Although not much is known about her family, we do know Wendelin was born in 1999 in Durango, Colorado, from Richard's previous relationship. Over time, they settled in Newark, Newcastle County, Delaware, the setting for this story. Madison's younger sister, Molly, was born on October 5, 2010. She quickly became Madison's best friend. With a deep affection for children, Madison was the eldest among 8 cousins who all cherished her dearly. She never missed a chance to play with them or put on enchanting performances that everyone found delightful. Her laughter was truly infectious. She had a cheerful spirit that could light up any room. Yet there were moments when Madison would become pensive and dreamy. Her father shared that even from a young age, she showed wisdom beyond her years. She observed and reflected carefully before reacting. Madison's affectionate nature extended to her hugs. They could lift anyone's spirits instantly. Both friends and family saw her as deeply loyal and always considerate about their well-being. Madison's curiosity stayed with her throughout her childhood. She loved learning and experimenting, which led her to join the Girl Scouts, a global youth organization for girls. By the fall of 2012, Existing Girl Scout troops were fully occupied, so her mom stepped up as their first troop leader. Madison, at the age of 9, entered the Brownies section, tailored for girls aged 7 to 10. Over the years, Madison distinguished herself as a cookie seller and earned several badges marking her exceptional performance in various duties. Throughout almost 10 in the Girl Scouts organization, she developed strong friendships. Later, driven by a desire to work with other young people and create a positive impact, she volunteered to assist in her sister Molly's troop. Madison was warm-hearted and committed to serving God and her country. She always lent a helping hand while adhering to the principles of the Girl Scouts. Like any young girl, she delighted in having fun. Even during her teenage years, she was known as the Queen of Pranks and loved planning parties with friends. Whether it was movie nights or makeovers that included manicures and pedicures, she could stay up all night but often struggled to wake up before 2 p.m. the next day. Before finishing elementary school, Madison met another central figure in this story, Anuka Stalinsky. Anuka was born in Newark on July 9, 2003. The two quickly became close friends and studied for exams together. Information about Anuka is limited, but we know her parents were Robert Stalinsky and Robin Kars. As of 2004, they lived on Arona Mink Drive in Newark. Madison and Anuka moved on to middle school together after completing elementary school. There they made new friends, including Noah Sharp, a fellow Newark native born on August 23, 2001. Details about Noah's background are limited too. However, it's known his mother Nikki Sharp had 2 other children, David and Brianna. The trio, Madison, Anuka, and Noah, would often go out together for ice cream or take long walks through the city's green spaces. When Noah and Madison crossed paths, mutual attraction sparked between them, and within a few months, a teenage romance blossomed. Initially, they were head over heels in love. However, in early 2020, after being together for just over a year, Madison decided to end the relationship without giving any apparent reasons. They parted ways amicably and agreed to remain friends. Nonetheless, Noah was heartbroken as he still deeply loved her. During this period, Anuka became a trusted confidant for Noah. They started seeing each other more frequently and texting almost every day. Although Noah's heart was still broken, with time he began dating Anuka. Despite his new relationship with Anuka, Noah did not lose contact with Madison. On her 17th birthday on September 12, 2020, he even visited her and brought a gift. That day, Madison's mother noticed that Noah was still upset about the breakup. When Anuka learned about this meeting, she became consumed with jealousy. She couldn't accept that her beloved continued to be friends with his ex-girlfriend. Likewise, Noah's resentment turned into anger. He wanted Madison to feel the same pain he was enduring. The following week, blinded by hatred and jealousy, Anuka and Noah began planning how to end Madison's life. Through text messages, FaceTime calls, and in-person meetings, they exchanged chilling ideas about possible weapons and methods for disposing of the body once the crime was committed. The messages they sent each other indicated their intention to make Madison suffer. Anuka suggested several options, including using a knife to inflict the fatal wound to the heart. They also discussed using a shotgun or perhaps a baseball bat. However, according to official documents, they quickly dismissed the idea of using a shotgun since it would produce too much noise. Although Noah wasn't very confident initially, they eventually decided on using a blunt object during these discussions. They also performed calculations to determine how many bricks would be necessary to prevent Madison's body from floating if they decided to dispose of her in the water. When doubts arose, they mentioned that another option was to bury her since Noah could dig a hole and knew where to find shovels. In the end, they devised what they believed to be the perfect plan. Madison loved ice cream almost as much as she loved Halloween. Her cheerful spirit eagerly awaited October every year to celebrate her favorite holiday. Anuka knew Madison's taste well and took advantage of this. On Friday, October 2, 2020, she called Madison and invited her out for ice cream and to spend the day together. Madison immediately agreed because She hadn't spoken to her friend for a long time and wanted to buy a gift for Molly, whose birthday was in 3 days. On that day, Madison wore black tights, denim shorts, gray boots, and a blue sweatshirt with the inscription New Jersey. She finished her look with white ghost-shaped earrings. Normally, she didn't wear much jewelry, especially earrings, but with Halloween approaching, she decided these ghost earrings would be perfect. At 2:44 p.m., she said goodbye to Heather, saying she would see her later, and left. Although there were no actual ghosts in this story, what happened next was far scarier. It was the last time her mother saw her alive. The following hours, days, weeks, and years turned into a true nightmare for the Sparrow family, her friends, and the residents of Newark. Several hours later, Heather began receiving insulting text messages from Madison's phone number, alongside messages implying that Madison had left the country. Heather initially thought it was a joke and even replied wishing her daughter luck in her endeavors, while joking that she had forgotten her passport in the safe. However, no response came back, even when Heather called Madison's phone. Heather became increasingly concerned when there was still no answer, while she was out with Molly, taking her to scout meetings and swimming lessons. The lack of response began to seriously worry her. Heather decided to call Annika, aware that they were supposed to meet later in the day. Upon answering, Annika burst into tears, explaining that Madison had insulted her and that she dropped her off near a store. Annika then suggested contacting Noah, but he wasn't responding either. Frustrated, Heather asked Annika to continue trying to reach him. The three of them, however, no new information surfaced. Disheartened, Heather opted to return home. On her way back, she received several messages from her daughter's friends who had also received unusual SMS messages and were keen to understand what was happening. Once she arrived home and searched for any clues, Heather found nothing that indicated her daughter had run away. Even the money given to her for her birthday, her clothes, and her credit card were still in her room. These strange messages made little sense. Madison had no reason to run away, especially without taking essential items like a bag with clothes and money. At approximately 8:30 p.m., when Madison failed to come home, Heather contacted 911 and reported her daughter missing. Despite continuous efforts to connect with people, all attempts were fruitless. Upon learning of the situation, Heather's parents traveled from another city to support their daughter. She also notified Madison's father, residing in Colorado, who promptly shared information on social media appealing for assistance in locating his daughter. On the next day, Saturday, October 3, 2020, the Delaware State Police issued a golden alert for 17-year-old Madison. This alert triggers all required procedures for searching for a missing person within Delaware. Over 2 days, police search teams, family members, and numerous friends scoured the farmlands near the University of Delaware, where Madison was last seen alive. The media also spread information about the search, urging people to provide any details they might have related to Madison's whereabouts. Delaware State Police simultaneously started questioning Madison's friends, and all evidence pointed to her ex-boyfriend. According to some sources, the girl headed to a wooded area in Newark behind an elementary school, where she was also seen with Noah on the day she disappeared. Detectives detained and interrogated the young man for almost 9 hours from October 4th through 5th, presenting several conflicting scenarios and insisting he didn't know what had happened. Eventually, the barrier of silence broke, shocking everyone. The young man confessed not only to taking Madison's life, but also claimed that Annika was his accomplice. Noah informed police that Annika hated Madison because she was jealous of her relationship with him. He also elaborated on how deeply he had been hurt by his breakup with Madison. Noah recounted driving Madison to the wooded area behind the elementary school. As they walked along a trail, he hid behind bushes with an aluminum baseball bat in hand. He told officers how Madison was happy to spend time with her friend and unsuspecting of the danger ahead. Suddenly emerging from hiding, Noah struck her on the head twice with great force. He admitted that he put all his strength into the second blow and said that it was at that moment he snapped after months of uncontrollable anger towards her for breaking his heart. Unable to contain himself, he continued delivering more blows to her body. Following the assault on Madison, Noah and Annika transported her body using Anna's car to a site beneath a bridge near the intersection of I-95 and a Delaware State road, approximately 15 minutes away from the crime scene and close to a warehouse. Upon reaching this location, they tried to submerge her body in the river, but failed. Instead, they opted to conceal it in a shallow grave they dug at the same spot. Using details provided by Noah, investigators meticulously searched the designated area. There, they unearthed an aluminum baseball bat used as a weapon bearing traces of blood. The crime scene yielded clothing worn by Madison when she left home, with some articles showing evidence of scorching. Subsequently, they guided law enforcement to a wooded area near the junction of I-95 and Delaware State Road. It was here that he and his accomplice had clandestinely interred the body on Monday, October 5, 2020. Corporal Heather Piper announced the finding of the body, leaving Madison's family, friends, and the entire community in disbelief. A few days later, on Friday, October 9th, hundreds of individuals gathered at the high school football field to honor and remember the victim. The autopsy revealed that Madison's death resulted from blunt force trauma to the head. Experts also found Noah's and Anna's DNA in physical evidence collected both at the crime scene and where the body was discovered. Noah faced charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a crime, and first-degree conspiracy. He was placed in a correctional facility with bail set at $1 million. On Monday, November 16, 2020, over a month after the tragic event, and following the processing of necessary evidence, 17-year-old Anna was also arrested. Her arrest occurred after a grand jury in Newcastle County indicted her on charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. Meanwhile, Madison's family was in disarray. Heather repeatedly stated that a rational reason for why her daughter's life was taken would never be found. Her main plea for justice was that these criminals would never again be able to harm others or themselves. Although Noah admitted to detectives that he committed the crime during an official court indictment, he did not plead guilty. This led to speculation that his defense might argue mental instability, a common tactic lawyers sometimes use to justify their clients' actions. This case appeared to be no exception. During a preliminary hearing, Noah's attorney stated that at the time of the murder, Noah was undergoing treatment for potential schizophrenia under the care of a psychiatrist. The lawyer also mentioned that Noah had sustained an injury in Chester County, Pennsylvania, approximately 3 weeks prior to the crime. She elaborated that due to this head injury, her client experienced gaps in memory and other issues. However, she did not specify the cause or severity of the injury. In May 2021, Annika pleaded guilty to charges of first-degree murder and first-degree conspiracy. Her lawyers negotiated a deal with prosecutors, wherein she agreed to testify against Noah regarding his intent to end Madison's life. According to court documents, several individuals, including those close to the victim, informed the police about Noah's alleged alter ego, a second personality. Prosecutors contended that Noah Helf had spread this information as part of a premeditated plan to murder Madison and later used this narrative in court. After 2 years of awaiting justice, the trial began on October 20, 2022, in Newcastle County. During the proceedings, approximately 30 witnesses were called by Deputy Attorneys General Matt Foley and JNDS. The courtroom displayed hours of video recordings of Noah's interrogations with state police detectives. The audience listened to Noah's altering narratives until he ultimately confessed. The defense challenged this evidence by emphasizing that their client was interrogated for too long. Attorney Monica Jerome noted that detectives manipulated the interrogation process. Noah received guidance on what to say and was subjected to pressure, but it was clear to everyone that this was simply a desperate attempt to justify the actions of the accused by any available means. The prosecution also presented text messages exchanged between Noah and Annika, detailing their plan for the crime. Faced with this evidence, the defense tried to convince the court that someone else had control over Noah's device and that he wasn't the one messaging Annika. Noah's mother and brother were called to testify sequentially, giving conflicting accounts several times. Nikki stated that her son was not wet when he returned home on the evening of October 2nd, while David claimed his brother was wet and looked like he'd been in a swamp. Nikki mentioned that shortly after Noah's arrival, Anuka entered the house calmly. In contrast, David said she entered angrily, slamming the door. Prosecutor Matt Frawley asked Nikki if she had discussed the evidence against Noah with him. She replied no. However, prosecutors played an audio recording of a phone call between Noah and his mother from a month before the trial, where they discussed surveillance footage from an elementary school. In the conversation, Noah mentioned his face wasn't visible in the video, where he and Anuka were seen near the elementary school about an hour before Madison's murder. Nikki reacted with relief. The video showed an African American of similar height and build as Noah carrying a baseball bat and walking into woods with a girl. The defense questioned relatives about head injuries Noah allegedly suffered on September 13, 2020, and another unconfirmed injury from a bicycle fall just hours before police interrogations on October 4th. Noah's lawyers suggested these injuries might have caused dissociative amnesia in their attempt to justify his statements. Faced with the claim he made to the police, the prosecutors questioned whether the injury was part of a conspiracy to murder Madison. The defense contested this point somewhat uncertainly. Annika confirmed all the prosecution's arguments during her 3-hour testimony in court. In her account, she calmly explained how Noah convinced her that Madison was speaking ill of her behind her back. Friends and relatives of the victim, however, emphasized that Madison never spoke negatively about her friends. After 8 days of court sessions and presenting over 250 pieces of evidence, the jury took only 3 hours to reach a final verdict. Noah Sharp was found guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder, and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When the jury's decision was announced, Noah and his mother showed no emotion. Noah simply turned and smiled at his mother. The Madison family cried in relief. Before leaving the courtroom, Heather Madison's mother uttered a phrase her daughter had used before: "Choose light, not darkness. Love conquers all." She also expressed gratitude, saying, "We want to thank our friends and family. This has been a 2-year process, and we couldn't have done this without their love and constant support." She continued by thanking the community and specifically Newark Charter School and its administration and families. Additionally, she appreciated those who supported the Love Wins 5K over the past 2 years and backed the Madison Sparrow Memorial Scholarship aimed at aiding future educators. Regarding Annika, when Noah's guilty verdict was announced, prosecutors stated that according to Delaware state law, she would be recommended a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years, as she was a minor at the time of the crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of West family. The West family appeared to everyone as a strong, happy, and well-off unit. The couple had been married for 14.5 years, raising a daughter together. They never gave anyone reason to suspect any difficulties in their marriage. That was until the early morning of January 13, 2018, when 42-year-old Mrs. West was found deceased near her own home. To understand why, we need to delve into the West family's history from the beginning and unravel the rumors about the late housewife's double life that had been circulating for years. Kat Dawn West, née Martin, was born on February 15, 1975, in the quaint town of Davie, Florida, the only child of Nancy and John Jonathan Martin. She grew up in a modest family environment. As a child, she yearned for a younger sibling, a dream unfulfilled due to her mother's health issues. Perhaps this is why Kat was overly attached to dolls. She treated them like living beings, singing to them and cradling them. In school, Kat was known for her beauty and sociability, actively participating in sports and dance. During her teenage years, signs of bipolar affective disorder began to show. This included days of depression and anxiety, alternating with periods when she felt overly happy and restless. Unfortunately, her parents didn't notice her condition right away. By then, Kat had started drinking to manage her emotions. It wasn't until she sought for alcoholism that the cause of her issues was identified. In her 20s, Kat managed to overcome alcohol dependency. Dealing with bipolar disorder, however, proved more challenging. She needed several strong medications that led to complex drug interactions and side effects. Eventually, they got the disorder under control, but she had to stay on medication until her untimely death. Kat longed for marriage, a family, and children, but her personal life had many difficulties, likely because of her mental health and alcohol problems. Despite this, the attractive blonde had numerous admirers and was often the life of the party. In her youth, Kat wanted to be a model. She went to castings and tried different looks. She was fascinated with Marilyn Monroe from the 1950s. Kat watched Monroe's movies on repeat, collected posters, and imitated her style and image. She even looked a bit like Marilyn, something she was proud of. Though Kat's dream of becoming a famous model didn't come true, her photos often appeared in local magazines. This gave her some recognition and occasionally made people recognize her in her hometown streets. At 28 years old, she finally met William West, the man she'd start a family with. William Jeffrey West, who mostly went by his middle name, was born in 1970 in Alabama into an ordinary family. From an early age, he dreamed of a career in the military or law enforcement. He was a diligent student and active sports enthusiast, robustly fit and incredibly focused. In the early 1990s, William joined the U.S. military, serving initially as a military police officer. William's commitment and dedication led him to become a military recruiter, responsible for enlisting individuals into the Army and Navy. Over time, he rose to head a recruitment division. In total, William devoted 2 decades to military service. Alongside his military career, William pursued higher education. He earned a bachelor's degree in public from the University of Carolina and continued his studies in criminal justice and disaster and emergency management, eventually earning a master's degree. William was intelligent, composed, and goal-oriented, yet modest and somewhat introverted. He preferred quiet gatherings over loud parties and generally shunned the spotlight. He married young and had 2 children, known for being a devoted family man and responsible parent. Upon retiring from the military, William became a corporal in the police department of a university town. He was entrusted with ensuring the safety of the campus community, approaching his duties with seriousness and responsibility. Although he was issued a service firearm, he never had to use it throughout his career. Kat and Jeffrey were an unusual but happy couple. Their paths crossed in the mid-2000s when Jeffrey was still serving in the military and married to his first wife. It seemed unlikely that the stern, quiet military man had anything in common with the flamboyant, bold, attention-loving blonde, yet they felt an instant mutual attraction. Despite their 5-year age gap, Jeffrey's existing marriage, and Kat's periodic struggles with alcohol, which she continually fought, their relationship blossomed. Jeffrey soon filed for divorce to be with his new love, and within less than 5 months of meeting, they surprisingly tied the knot in a Las Vegas chapel. In 2005, the couple welcomed their only child together, a daughter named Lola. They settled in the quiet town of Sarah, Alabama, Jeffrey's home state, in a custom-built cozy home that Kat personally designed. She adorned their bedroom with portraits of her idol, Marilyn Monroe. Neighbors frequently praised the Wests, describing them as a happy couple despite being complete opposites. Caitlin always strived to look stunning and attractive with bold makeup, stylish hair, and Barbie-like outfits. She thrived on catching people's glances and loved compliments, always appearing cheerful and smiling. Jeffrey, in contrast, seemed overshadowed by her presence, appearing reserved, serious, and highly disciplined, a reflection of his long military career. Despite her efforts and striking looks, Kat couldn't carve out a successful modeling career after marriage and the birth of her daughter. She focused on creating a cozy home and raising her child. Yet the mundane life of a homemaker wasn't enough. She craved attention and recognition. With the rise of social media in the late 2000s, she began actively posting pictures online. Initially, these were harmless Barbie or Marilyn Monroe-themed photos, but gradually they became more provocative and daring. Close sources say her husband not only didn't mind her new hobby but often played the role of her personal photographer. It seemed harmless and eventually became a lucrative venture for Kat through paid subscriptions. One day, they bought a selection of ready-made seafood dishes from a popular local restaurant, a bottle of fine brandy and absinthe from the supermarket, along with aromatic candles Kat picked from a nearby store to set a romantic mood. Captured on surveillance cameras at each location, they appeared happy and carefree, smiling and joking with no hint of the impending tragedy. Returning home with their purchases, the couple enjoyed their dinner and indulged in the alcoholic beverages. Kat, who had intermittently battled alcohol dependency, requested Jeff conduct a hot photo session, first in lingerie and then without any clothes. Jeff was not opposed. He took several revealing shots that were posted on Kat's private OnlyFans profile by around 1 p.m. The romantic evening, intended to culminate in a passionate night, deteriorated into a nightmare that led to a tragic outcome, culminating in the discovery of a body on the road. Early on the morning of January 13th, around 5 a.m., a young neighbor of the West was on her way to work. Although sun had not yet risen, it was light enough outside. As she passed the West's house, something caught her eye. It took her a moment to comprehend what it was. Slowing down, she soon realized an almost fully unclothed woman was lying motionless on the road. Additionally, she thought she saw someone standing on the doorstep of the house, who quickly vanished into the shadows upon noticing her. During questioning, she couldn't definitively state whether this person entered the house or ran off down the street. Startled and uncertain about what to do, the young woman hesitated to approach the body. She returned home and informed her parents. Together, they called emergency services to report this grim discovery. At the operator's request, and while waiting for help to arrive, they reluctantly approached the woman on the ground, recognized as Mrs. West, and checked for a pulse. Tragically, there was none. Her body was cold and already showing signs of rigor mortis. Mrs. West was found face down with most of her body on the sidewalk, dressed only in a bright pink bralette top. A pool of blood had formed under her head, and nearby lay a bottle of absinthe with some of its contents spilled on the road and blood stains on it. A short distance away lay her smashed smartphone. Since it was a quiet residential area, there were no other witnesses during the night. Thus, the time gap between when Mrs. West's car was last seen around 8:30 p.m. and 5 a.m., when the neighbor discovered Katlin's lifeless body, remains shrouded in mystery, likely only witnessed by her husband. What might Mr. West be concealing? Detective Michael Melhoff was among those first arriving at this troubling scene and proceeded to inquire at the house where Mrs. West's body had been found. A man answered the door, appearing somewhat anxious, but professing ignorance regarding the situation at hand. When asked about his wife's whereabouts, he said he'd woken up and didn't find her in bed. The detective then asked him to step outside, informing him that a woman's body, identified by neighbors as Kat West, was found near the house. Throwing on a jacket, the man followed the officer and confirmed that the deceased was indeed his wife. However, Jeff's reaction was unusually calm. He did not rush to the body with tears or screams. When questioned about his whereabouts and activities during the night, Mr. West stated he had slept soundly as they had been drinking the previous evening. When asked what he thought had happened, he merely shrugged, suggesting it might have been an unfortunate accident. Mr. West also shared that his wife suffered from bipolar affective disorder, requiring medication, and struggled with alcohol, behaving erratically when intoxicated. He mentioned that she would sometimes jump on their backyard trampoline, occasionally missing it and injuring herself. A search of the house revealed no signs of a struggle or violence. 2 plates with leftover food, 2 glasses, and a half-empty brandy bottle were on the kitchen table. Her high heels captured in her last pictures lay under the table, and underwear matching the bra she was wearing when found was on the floor. However, several blood-stained napkins in the trash and an open bottle of cleaner raised questions. That day, Jeffrey was taken into custody as the main and sole suspect in the case. Chronologically describing the last evening spent with his wife, Jeffrey noted that she drank heavily, which he greatly disliked. After a revealing photo session, he hoped they would move to the bedroom for a more intimate setting. He stepped away to shower for a few minutes and returned to find his wife still sitting at the table, drinking straight from the bottle and texting someone on her phone. Jeff was angered by this, and his requests to put away the gadget were ignored by Kat. He tried to snatch the phone from her hands, leading to a minor scuffle, during which he accidentally elbowed his wife's face, causing a few drops of blood to appear from her nose. According to him, this was the blood police found on discarded napkins. Mr. West eventually took the phone from his wife and, opening the door, hurled it into darkness. He claimed that, after this event, he turned around and went to bed, convinced that his spouse would soon calm down and join him. He allegedly remained unaware of how events unfolded further until the police knocked on his door, asking about. He speculated that his wife might have gone outside to find her phone, taking the absinthe bottle with her to finish it. He also suggested that she might have fallen, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and froze to death, or that someone might have attacked her. Mr. West couldn't explain why Mrs. West was without the bottom part of her enticing pink lingerie set, or why she went to look for her phone in just a bra without putting on any outerwear hanging near the entrance. He attributed such behavior to alcohol intoxication. The suspect's story seemed suspicious and inconsistent. He claimed to be too intoxicated to remember certain details, leaving the investigation to piece together the sequence of events. The evidence was scarce and there were no witnesses. The autopsy determined that the cause of death for the 42-year-old woman was blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted with the absinthe bottle found nearby, compounded by hypothermia. At the time of the incident, her blood alcohol level exceeded 2.5 per ml, indicative of severe intoxication with impaired coordination and a high risk of losing consciousness. At first glance, everything seemed to align. Kat, heavily intoxicated, ventured outside searching for her phone, taking along the unfinished bottle of absinthe. She likely lost her balance, possibly while reaching for her gadget, fell, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and died from the injury and exposure. The bottle with blood traces lay near her head, and the smartphone, the reason she left the house, was found nearby. However, the investigation found this scenario too simplistic and staged. Experts confirmed that the head injury was inflicted with the bottle beside the body. Forensic analysis suggested that if she had fallen on her own, the bottle likely would have rolled away rather than remained parallel to her head. Both Kat's and her husband's fingerprints were found on the bottle, along with several smudged prints that couldn't be identified. The blood-stained napkins and the open bottle of household cleaner discovered in the house led investigators to a different conclusion. Their theory, later presented as the primary and only plausible one in court, suggested the couple argued over Kat's preoccupation with her subscribers. In a fit of anger, Jeff struck her with the bottle, causing a fatal injury. Panicking, he tried to stage an accidental fall by cleaning the blood in the house, but failed to dispose of all evidence. Partially supporting this theory was the fitness app on Jeff's phone, which tracked his steps. According to the app, he was active around the house until midnight and again early in the morning before police arrived. This contradicted his claim of being asleep. Police speculated that he was attempting to conceal evidence during these times. A third person involved, the neighbor who discovered the body, recalled during questioning that she saw a male silhouette on the doorstep who quickly left in an unknown direction. She couldn't confidently assert whether it was Mr. West or someone else in the dim early dawn light. Additionally, she couldn't discern if this person entered the house or not. This information intrigued investigators. Considering Kat's popularity online, she had many male admirers who paid to view revealing photos. A new theory emerged. An obsessed follower among her subscribers might have sought a personal encounter with Kat and tracked her down, hoping for closer acquaintance. While Kat did receive messages from various men, sometimes with inappropriate proposals, she maintained her distance. No explicit threats or harassment were found in these communications. A few particularly persistent fans living in other states with solid alibis were quickly ruled out as suspects. Nevertheless, footprints not belonging to homeowners were found on the doorstep and vanished into the lawn. Their origin remained a mystery. Could Mr. West have harmed his wife? This question lingered as evidence pointed towards multiple potential scenarios yet remained inconclusive overall. Jeffrey's neighbors, friends and relatives described the couple as happy and thriving. He was aware of his wife's unique online activities, but saw them as harmless fun. Jeffrey denied ever being violent towards his wife, stating he loved her too much to hurt her. Nonetheless, arguments had become a frequent occurrence in their household. A particularly telling text exchange dated January 12th was found on their phones where the couple argued heatedly. Kat criticized Jeffrey for not matching her in vivacity and temperament, even suggesting they might be incompatible. Despite this, Jeffrey remained the prime suspect with forensic evidence and gathered details only indirectly implying his guilt. Following his arrest, not only his parents but also his daughter and in-laws rallied in his defense. They were firmly convinced of his innocence and asserted he could never harm his wife. After Jeffrey West's arrest, he couldn't afford the $500,000 bail set for him, which meant he had to stay in custody until his trial, a wait stretching almost 3 years. He was offered a plea deal admitting guilt in his wife's demise in exchange for a reduced sentence. However, Jeffrey adamantly refused, maintaining his innocence. The trial commenced in November 2020 and attracted significant media attention, partly due to Kat's online notoriety. This publicity put considerable pressure on the judges and jurors. The possibility of third-party involvement that fateful night was no longer considered. The prosecution argued that all evidence pointed to Mr. West. They believed that in a fit of jealousy and under the influence of alcohol, he struck his wife with a bottle, causing fatal injuries. In a panic, they suggested he staged the scene to mimic an accident by removing evidence from inside the house. Jeffrey's defense team contended that Kat's death was indeed accidental, citing her extremely high blood alcohol levels as factors affecting her balance and coordination. In heartfelt testimony, Kat's mother supported her son-in-law, describing her daughter as eccentric, but insisted Jeffrey loved her unconditionally and would never harm her. She also appealed to the court to consider their granddaughter Lola, who had lost her mother and stood to lose her father too. On January 11, 2021, the jury returned a guilty verdict for involuntary manslaughter. Jeffrey was sentenced to the maximum of 13 years considering time already served. Notably, if he had accepted the plea deal initially offered, he might have already been free by now. All appeals by Jeffrey and his lawyers have so far been unsuccessful. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano's story began quite harmlessly. She was receiving attention from a work colleague which she consistently ignored. She sincerely hoped that her admirer would soon understand and just leave her alone. However, one careless action by Celeste drastically changed everything, turning her suitor into an obsessed pursuer. Another thoughtless act led to irreversible consequences. Celeste Cristano was born on November 30th, 1997, in the northeastern part of Melbourne in Victoria State, Australia. She was the youngest of 2 children to parents Eggy Darrow and Tony Mano. She grew up alongside her older brother named Alessandro. According to some accounts, their father left his wife when the children were still small and soon remarried. However, he always maintained contact with his older offspring, supported them financially, and tried to be actively involved in their lives. During her school years, Celeste was quite sociable, active, and friendly. She engaged in sports and dance, served as the captain of the cheerleading team, and had big plans for her future. Initially, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer and enrolled in the prestigious University of Melbourne, studying criminal and civil law. However, towards the end of her studies, she found law dull and began studying advertising and marketing. In 2018, she was hired by a large and rapidly growing company that sold various goods on e-commerce platforms. Smart and talented, Celeste quickly grasped everything on the fly. She successfully fulfilled her duties and rapidly ascended the career ladder. From a simple call center worker, she became the head of an entire department in less than 2 years. Considered one of the most promising employees, everyone admired her intelligence, initiative, and ability to organize work competently. Moreover, Celeste possessed outstanding external attributes and a flawless figure. During her university years, she even participated in the university beauty contest and was among the top 3 leaders. She always had many admirers from a young age, but was meticulous in choosing partners. Among her colleagues was Louis Sacco. He worked at the company nearly 16 years older than her and showed a lively interest in Celeste from her first days at the office. Worth noting is that Louis Sacco was quite reserved and unsociable, evidently lacking career ambitions, as he long occupied the same minor position without desire for development. Kind, smiling, and open, Celeste did not want to hurt Louis Sacco's feelings, so she always politely declined whenever he tried asking her out. Despite this, Lou repeatedly attempted to draw her attention in various ways. Sometimes Celeste would make jokes to lighten the mood, but firmly desired nothing to do with him. His attentions were persistent and awkwardly annoying, but keeping composure, Celeste hoped he would soon give up or shift his focus elsewhere as time passed. Louis Sacco remained relentless, becoming almost obsessed with the young beauty, Celeste Mano. Everyone around him noticed it. One day, Celeste confided in a close colleague that she wouldn't ever consider a relationship with Louis. First, he was odd and unpredictable. Second, she never felt any attraction towards men who lacked ambition and life goals. Third, the significant age gap also played a role. Nonetheless, she did pity him because despite all his efforts, he stood no chance. Unfortunately, Louis Sacco lost focus on his work in his fruitless attempts to win Celeste's attention and affection. Historically, he was a very hard-working employee, but now he completely ignored his job duties and his productivity suffered greatly. Senior management was unhappy with this drop in performance. Louis was given 3 reprimands and warnings. In early autumn of 2019, the company ultimately fired him for his negligence. Louis Sacco was very upset by this turn of events. As he packed up his things at the office, it seemed he was about to cry. Celeste experienced mixed feelings. On one hand, she felt relieved that he would disappear from her life and stop bothering her with persistent overtures. But on the other hand, she felt some guilt believing his dismissal partly happened because of her. As a department manager, Celeste thanked Louis for his years of service and escorted him to the building exit. She tried to encourage him with a pat on the shoulder and sincerely wished him luck as they parted ways. However, it turned out this harmless act was a mistake, a catalyst that fueled Louis' belief they could make their relationship work. Instantly, Louis decided that Celeste was simply afraid to start an office romance since she was his boss and feared general disapproval or damage to her career. Now convinced nothing stood in the way of their potential happiness together, Louis, overwhelmed by his emotions, unexpectedly kissed Celeste on the cheek. An awkward pause ensued. Stunned by his audacity, Celeste didn't know how to react, so she just turned around and hurried back into the office building without saying anything. This reaction further convinced Louis that Celeste harbored feelings for him and believed he should not give up pursuing her. Just days after, Louis created a social media account, found Celeste's profile, and sent her a friend request. At first, she accepted it, thinking no harm would come of it. But when he started bombarding her with requests to meet up and go out together, she tried to decline politely. Eventually, she just blocked him. The following day, the former colleague sent another friend request from a newly created profile. Celeste tried to ignore it. However, he began commenting on her photos, praising her looks, and mentioning how great they would be as a couple. She then adjusted her profile settings so only friends could send her messages or comment on her photos or posts. A week later, during a family gathering, she mentioned the persistent pursuer to her relatives. She also recounted the strange incident from the day he was fired. Her family listened but assumed it wasn't serious, and that the unwanted admirer would lose interest and disappear from her life soon. Louis didn't have Celeste's personal phone number while they worked together. They only communicated through work channels. But now Celeste began receiving peculiar romantic messages from an unknown number. She quickly guessed who they were from. The admirer sent romantic poems he had written, praised her beauty again, and tried to convince her to meet up. Celeste answered his call only once in an attempt to have a serious conversation with him. She explained that nothing could happen between them and tried to persuade him to stop pursuing her. Nevertheless, he didn't listen. Instead, he just complimented how pleasant her voice was and expressed how glad he was that she had finally picked up. After this conversation, she tried blocking him again, but each time he'd call from a new number. Eventually, she decided to change her own number. Still within a week or so later, Louis managed to find it out and continued his telephone harassment. Seeking some form of protection for about half a year, Celeste kept unsuccessful attempts at ignoring the crazed admirer. She blocked his numbers and fake social media pages, but he persisted with messages and continually disrupted her usual life. The stream of messages continued, and over time, their nature shifted from romantic to bold and threatening. The man stopped asking politely. He began demanding meetings and detailing his delusional, intimate fantasies about what he intended to do with her immediately. However, that wasn't the worst of it. It became evident that the stalker began following her from work to home, where she lived. Celeste didn't initially realize that Louis was now present in her life beyond just the messages. He was literally tracking her every move. She occasionally glimpsed him near her home, but convinced herself each time that it was merely a product of nerves or imagination. When she finally understood that she was not mistaken and that Louis, with his obsessive behavior, was indeed following her, she decided to seek police protection. Celeste wanted law enforcement to issue a special order prohibiting the stalker from approaching her and her home. However, the officers were indifferent, even mocking at times. According to them, writing poems or expressing explicit fantasies in text messages is neither illegal nor punishable. Since Celeste couldn't provide evidence of Louis following her and lurking near her home, they simply asked her to leave the precinct and not hinder them from catching real criminals. For another 6 months, Celeste continued to endure relentless harassment from her former colleague. During workdays, she frequently noticed his car parked across the street from her office. In the evenings, he would drive past her house several times. She constantly felt his gaze on her, increasing her anxiety and making daily life tense. In August 2020, Celeste approached the police again. This time she provided photo and video evidence on her phone, showing that Louis was indeed following her. A different officer took her statement this time, an officer who took the situation more seriously and expressed surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised her to immediately go to court, where a restraining order was issued against Louis. He was notified that he could no longer call, approach her, or try to contact her in any other way. Clearly, the man did not expect this turn of events and indeed disappeared from Celeste's sight for a few weeks. She was happy for the first time in a while. She felt free and believed that the harasser would no longer bother her. However, her relief was premature. Less than a month later, she began receiving messages from unknown numbers. Initially, Louis pleaded and then demanded she retract her statement and remove the restraining order, as he believed it interfered with their romantic relationship. After receiving several messages, Celeste immediately went to the police, since her pursuer had violated the restraining order. Now, he had to face the consequences. The man was fined and warned that further violations could lead to much more severe measures. If he didn't leave the young woman alone, he could end up in jail. After this incident, Louis did not make his presence known for almost 2 months. The young woman believed he had finally left her alone. In September 2020, Celeste met a young man named Chris Reedsdale. He was just a year older than her, and they quickly found they had many common interests, views on life, and goals. Consequently, a romantic relationship soon developed between them. She told her new boyfriend about the harassment from her former admirer and confessed that although Louis had not appeared, she still felt anxious. Chris endeavored to surround his girlfriend with care and attention, doing everything to make her feel safe and worry-free. In early November, Celeste invited Chris to a family dinner to introduce him to her parents and brother. Celeste's choice was well received by her family. They quickly hit it off, and her mother even jested that her daughter was now in safe hands. The following weeks passed peacefully, with no sign of the former admirer, who did not attempt to contact Celeste. The young woman found joy in spending all her free time with Chris. It appeared she no longer worried about Louis possibly barging back into her life or causing her any harm. On November 15, 2020, the love-struck couple decided to go out on a date. They sat in a cafe, enjoying each other's company. During this pleasant moment, the young woman suggested they capture it by taking a selfie. The photo turned out very romantic. They were sitting at the same table, embracing, smiling, and looking genuinely happy. Celeste was so fond of this picture that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. In doing so, she aimed to share the news of her new relationship and indicate how serious things were between them. Chris also posted the photo on his page with a touching caption about how much he loved Celeste and how he would do everything to keep her eyes sparkling with happiness as depicted in the picture. Unfortunately, this outing would be their last as a couple. On the evening of their final date, Chris dropped Celeste off at her home, and they said goodbye with plans to meet again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen talking with her mother about her boyfriend before heading to bed, since she had to get up early for work the next morning. On Monday, November 16, 2020, around 4 a.m., Eggy was awakened by the sound of breaking glass, but didn't immediately grasp what was happening. Then there were suspicious noises. Banging, screams, and commotion followed. At first, it seemed like these noises were coming from outside on the street. However, she soon realized they were emanating from within the house. Eggy leapt out of bed, threw on a robe, and rushed to her daughter's room. She flung open the door and in the dim light saw someone literally jumping away from Celeste's bed before escaping through a broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. Her daughter lay in a pool of her own blood, covered in cuts and small shards of broken glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide open, staring upward. Immediately, her mother called emergency services and tried to stem the deep bleeding wounds on her daughter's body until the paramedics arrived. Unfortunately, it was too late. By the time police doctors got there, she had already passed away. The medical examiners later found over 20 penetrating stab wounds on her body, with the fatal blow aimed at her heart. During the investigation, the prime suspect was scrutinized. Analyzing the situation and comparing it with Eggy's testimony, police concluded that the assailant took less than 3 minutes to break into the victim's room through the window and carry out the attack before her mother entered. The suspect used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, while Celeste tried to defend herself as indicated by numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if her daughter had any enemies, Eggy could only recall one name: Louis Sacco. He had obsessively pursued the young woman for over a year, harassing her with calls and threatening messages. This information was corroborated by other family members as well as friends and colleagues. At the scene, the suspect left many bloody fingerprints, and DNA was found on a fence he jumped over while fleeing since he had injured his hand. It became imperative to detain and interrogate Louis immediately as the prime suspect to verify and compare all evidence and witness statements. Louis was arrested that same day, but initially vehemently denied his involvement in the incident. He insisted that he loved Celeste and would never harm her. Forensic results later confirmed the bloody fingerprints found in the victim's room and on the fence to him. Law enforcement also highlighted the restraining order against approaching the young woman, which he had violated. Additionally, on the evening before the tragedy, it was discovered that Louis had purchased a hammer and a large knife at a local hardware store. This transaction was captured on surveillance cameras at the checkout. Louis used the hammer to break into the house through a window and then used the knife in his fatal attack on the unfortunate woman. A calculated criminal or a man in need of treatment. The evidence against Sacco was undeniable, further underscored by his long-term surveillance of the victim, knowing practically everything about her. The final trigger for him appeared to be a photo posted by the young woman on social media with her new boyfriend. After seeing this, he went to a store, bought a knife and hammer, and under cover of night, went to Celeste's home to end her life. His actions were seen as calculated and premeditated criminal activity. Yet Louis's behavior was quite erratic, raising questions about his mental stability. Notably, at nearly 39 years old, he had never married, continued living with his parents, had almost no friends, and never held a job for long periods. People described him as nervous and introverted with severe socialization issues. Additionally, Louis had a biological brother serving a lengthy sentence for another criminal act at that time. Following these events, a forensic psychiatric evaluation was ordered for Louis, with his attorney insisting that his client required specialized treatment instead of imprisonment. This argument angered and upset the victim's family, who feared that this cruel individual might evade punishment. After interviewing Louis and analyzing his behavior, psychiatric experts concluded he did indeed suffer from some mental disorders. However, and it's important, they determined that at the time of the crime he was fully aware of his actions. Furthermore, he had meticulously planned the crime in advance, carefully considering the details. As a result, despite his efforts to feign insanity, Sacco would inevitably face a trial. The trial and subsequent sentencing did not occur until the autumn of 2023, 3 years after the tragic death of the young woman. During this period, the criminal made several attempts to demonstrate his mental illness, hoping to avoid conviction for deliberate criminal acts. He spent most of this time in a psychiatric facility. In the courtroom, Louis appeared calm and detached, showing little interest in the proceedings. Although he admitted his guilt, he maintained that his intention was not to take the girl's life, but to win her affection. However, the jury unanimously found Louis guilty on all charges. He was then sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 30 years. Celeste's law, which ultimately was not passed, aimed to address the fact that existing laws did not consider online stalking and phone harassment as criminal offenses. The parents of Celeste highlighted that their daughter had sought police protection as early as 2020, but her complaint was not taken seriously due to the limitations of the current legislation. Over the 3-year period leading up to the trial, the mother of the deceased young woman, along with legal experts and activists, collaborated to develop Celeste's law. This law sought to establish criminal accountability for online stalking through social media platforms, text messages, and emails. The hope was that such a law would provide protection for countless women and girls, preventing similar tragedies from occurring. Despite these efforts, the investigations revealed that most online stalkers remained covert and did not attempt any direct contact with their victims. The amendments made to the legislation primarily focused on restricting access to personal information on social media platforms. In cases involving severe stalking with threats, a restraining order could be issued, similar to real-life scenarios. Nevertheless, there remained a lack of criminal accountability for such crimes. Currently, a stalker might only receive a verbal warning for their actions, and in cases of repeated violations, they could face fines, but not always. The enactment of Celeste's law, with its proposed changes, remains pending. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli was born on June 30th, 1969, in a small town in Southern California. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Marjorie and James Fold, with 2 older siblings, Michael and Michelle. Yvonne was especially close to her sister Michelle from a young age. Tragedy struck when Yvonne was 13, with the loss of her mother after a long illness. Her father James remarried a year later to Lillian, who turned out to be a kind and caring stepmother. Yvonne and her siblings developed a wonderful relationship with Lillian, who treated them as her own. Yvonne pursued a good education and experimented with various career paths, but her true passion lay in fashion design. She dreamed of turning her hobby into a successful business. However, her personal life was marked by misfortune. She had 2 failed marriages, the last one ending in divorce from Kevin Baldelli in 2007. Adding to her woes, Yvonne underwent surgery in her youth, which was followed by complications that left her unable to have children. After her second divorce, Yvonne lived a solitary life in her small apartment, where her only constant companion was her beloved dog, whom she lovingly referred to as her child. Despite her challenges, Yvonne remained close to her family, calling her father and sister daily and making it a point to visit them at least once a month. In 2009, as Yvonne was approaching her 40th birthday, she met Brian Brimmager, a married Marine with a young son. Despite being committed, Brian was open to an extramarital affair and confided in Yvonne about his unhappy marriage, stating that his only reason for not filing for divorce was the welfare of his child. Yvonne was taken by Brian's fit appearance and believed him. Having had a loveless marriage, she knew it was tough to leave, especially with kids. She didn't pressure him, thinking his child was the main issue. Little did she know, Brian was a charming liar, using his looks to juggle multiple relationships and fake promises. It became clear that Brimmager, who was married, was having an affair with not 1, but 2 women. One of them was Yvonne, and the other was Christine Verhoeven, a beautiful blonde with many influential contacts. Christine worked as an analyst at the White House. When Yvonne found out that her lover, Brian, was cheating on his wife with another woman, she decided to take action. Gathering her courage, she called Brian's wife to inform her that her husband was having an affair, not only with her, but also with another woman. This shocking news sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult decision. In the end, he chose Yvonne, although it's possible that she influenced his decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with Yvonne. At the time, he was still serving in the Marines, but he had been thinking about ending his military career for a while. They seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's family remained skeptical of her new partner, questioning the sincerity of his feelings for her. In the summer of 2011, Brian started talking about making drastic changes to his life, including leaving the Marines, moving away from the city, and settling down on a tropical island. Yvonne shared his vision, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever he chose to go. She believed she had found the love of her life and adored him. By September, Yvonne decided to move to Panama's Carino Island, a tropical haven. Her dream was to open a boutique, creating custom outfits for tourists. In early September, Yvonne, Brian, and her dog flew to Panama, then took a ferry to Carino Island, renting an oceanfront house. The island's hot and humid climate attracted tourists, especially divers and surfers, year-round. Brian, a skilled guitar player since his teenage years, brought his instrument to the island with the intention of launching a music career, performing at various entertainment venues. Soon after settling in, he established connections with several local bar owners, and one of them offered him a gig. He would play in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, and as a token of appreciation, the audience would often buy him drinks, leading to a habit of heavy daily drinking. Yvonne's business, on the other hand, struggled to take off, with sluggish sales and meager profits. However, she persevered and found work at one of the bars. She also adopted a second dog, which she found on the island, and decided to keep. She maintained daily contact with her sister Michelle Valenzuela, sharing every detail, but her messages became increasingly brief and somber, causing concern among her family. Initially, the island seemed like a paradise to they. Yvonne had hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic beach wedding. However, as time passed, Brian showed no signs of rushing into marriage. Their relationship quickly began to deteriorate. In early December, Michelle became concerned when she stopped receiving messages from her sister Yvonne. Then, on December 14, 2011, Michelle received an unexpected call from Yvonne's boyfriend Brian. He asked when he could come by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in Michelle's garage before he and Yvonne had traveled to Panama. This call surprised Michelle because it meant Brian had returned to the US. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even reached out? Brian told Michelle that he had explained everything in an email he had sent a few days earlier. He also claimed that Yvonne had sent Michelle a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing. So, she turned to her email and discovered two unread messages, one from her sister Yvonne and one from Brian. Brian claimed in his message that Yvonne had left him for a new lover and moved to Costa Rica. However, a message supposedly from Yvonne stated that she had left him after discovering his infidelity and that another woman, Christine Verhoeven, had given birth to his child. This message also claimed that Yvonne had met someone new and gone to Costa Rica with him. It seemed believable at first, especially since Yvonne was unable to have children, and news of her partner's infidelity could have been devastating. However, Yvonne was not one to act impulsively, and it was unusual that she hadn't contacted her sister to discuss her situation. The tone of the message from Yvonne also raised suspicions as it didn't sound like her previous communications. Michelle suggested filing a missing persons report for Yvonne, but Brian was hesitant, claiming she was fine and capable of taking care of herself. He insisted she would come home on her own, but his nervousness and quick departure after picking up his vehicle raised suspicions. Shortly after, a message from Yvonne's phone arrived, stating she would return home in January for their father's birthday. This brought Michelle some relief, and she decided to wait, hoping Yvonne would come back as planned. By mid-January, Yvonne remained missing and hadn't reached out. Meanwhile, Michelle was stunned to learn that Brian had unexpectedly married Christine Verhoeven shortly before the new year began. What made this even more surprising was that he had only parted ways with his previous girlfriend a few weeks earlier. Michelle's concern for her sister's safety prompted her to report Yvonne missing to the police, as she suspected Yvonne hadn't actually gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry to Panama confirmed her fears, verifying that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Michelle's cousin, a programmer, helped trace the IP address of the emails supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December. The investigation revealed that the emails were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. As the situation grew increasingly alarming, Michelle quickly informed the police of her discovery. Valenzuela then reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and continued to send messages from her phone and email, impersonating her for about a month. Although there wasn't enough concrete evidence to arrest Brian at the time, law enforcement interviewed him and continued gathering proof of his guilt. It was discovered that Brian had asked Christine to marry him while he was still in Panama with Yvonne, promising they would soon return and raise their daughter together. However, Christine was not aware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on a business trip. 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance, her sister and niece conducted their own investigation and flew to Panama, where they sought the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator who specialized in finding missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events Brian had given. After listening to them, Winter immediately expressed his concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were low. With his extensive experience in such investigations and using his connections, Winter decided to pressure the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning Yvonne's disappearance into international news. A press conference was also organized, which included Yvonne's family members. After arriving in Panama, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends joined the search for Brian Baldelli and assisted in the investigation. Together, they thoroughly searched the tropical island of Carino, but found no trace of him. The dense undergrowth and swampy marshes, which were home to a wide variety of wildlife, hindered their search efforts. The family also questioned the island's residents about their knowledge of Brian and Yvonne and what they could reveal about the couple's behavior. It became clear that Brian and Yvonne had been drinking excessively and frequently got into loud public arguments, disregarding those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars, drinking and arguing. Moreover, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body, and she rarely removed her sunglasses, seemingly to conceal the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house they rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residents. Meanwhile, FBI agents brought in a specialized team of divers to search the waters surrounding the island for potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. From the start, Brian was the main suspect in the case, but there was no solid evidence to charge him with. He repeatedly denied any involvement, sticking to the same story that his ex-partner Yvonne had run off with another man. It wasn't until September 21, 2012, that Brian was finally questioned by the police and a search of his home was conducted. At that time, his wife Christine was at work and Brian was unemployed, staying at home to take care of their child and enjoying his favorite hobby, playing golf. Brian claimed Yvonne left him after discovering his child with another woman, but became anxious when police found Yvonne's laptop on his table. The laptop had messages sent after she supposedly left, including a photo of Yvonne with a bruise and a conversation between Brian and his mistress about their secret affair. The search history showed queries about cleaning bloodstains and removing blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, as neither Aon's body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Aon didn't definitively prove his guilt. However, a discovery by Don Winter shed more light on the case. Before leaving Panama, Brimminger had sold a machete he owned to a buyer online. During their conversation, he jokingly said he had used the weapon once to finish off a stripper. Although the machete was seized for examination, it didn't initially yield any conclusive evidence. The long-awaited arrest was still pending. Meanwhile, the police had overlooked a crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance to make it seem like she was still alive. Before returning to the US, Brian went to Costa Rica and used the missing woman's card a few times, creating the illusion that she had fled there. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, eventually draining the card before discarding it. However, Brian didn't realize that he was caught on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. In July 2013, a year and a half after the woman vanished, her relatives, armed with evidence collected by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally succeeded in getting Brian arrested. At first, he was held on charges of lying and obstructing the investigation, as there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with anything more serious at that time. By then, Christine had given birth to a second son just a week before his arrest, making Brian a father for the second time. The authorities tried to have an open conversation with the suspect, offering him the opportunity to admit to the crime and reveal the location of Yvonne's body. However, Brian consistently denied any involvement. His lawyer also claimed that since there was no body or direct evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance, there was no proof of his guilt. In the swamp on the island of Kinero, a worker stumbled upon a gruesome discovery just 2 months after Brian's arrest. While taking a shortcut through the underbrush, the worker spotted an army backpack partially submerged in the water. Curious about what might be inside, the worker opened the bag, only to be met with horror at the sight of a human skull. The worker immediately notified the police, who responded and took the backpack into custody for further examination. Inside, they found fragments of a human body, as well as the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been deliberately dismembered, placed in the bag, and discarded in a remote area, likely intended to never be found. DNA testing later confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne. However, many of her limbs were missing. Further examination by pathologists revealed that Yvonne had suffered a brutal beating before her death, including a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. When the unique chop marks on the victim's bones were matched to the machete's blade, it confirmed that the body had been dismembered with this weapon, as each blade has a distinct signature, similar to human fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. In 2014, Michelle Valenzuela got a cancer diagnosis, and after 6 months of intense treatment, realized it was futile. She dedicated her last months to seeking justice for her sister, testifying against Brian and submitting evidence to the court despite her weakening health. Brian assaulted Yvonne in a drunken rage after she discovered his affair, stabbing her to death. He then dismembered her body, killing her dogs, and hid the parts in a backpack in a swamp. Brian fabricated a story about Yvonne leaving him, gaining sympathy from locals, and even found a new girlfriend. However, during the trial, his girlfriend testified against him, and he was forced to admit his guilt, claiming self-defense despite evidence showing he was fully aware of his actions. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2035. At sentencing, credit was given for his prior service in the Marines, which spared him from a life sentence. Meanwhile, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, maintained her husband's innocence and pledged to stand by him no matter what. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to George and Susan Loof. She spent her childhood in Arcadia with her parents until 2000, when the family moved to Ney, where her mother worked as a special education teacher and her father was the school principal. Growing up, Sydney was an energetic and outdoor-oriented girl who loved nature. Her father, George, often took her fishing during her school years. She was also involved in sports, playing basketball and golf, where she showed promise. However, she developed scoliosis, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities and ended her sports career. After graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney found employment at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. Despite moving from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, Sydney remained close to her family, who made an effort to stay in touch almost daily and regularly met for dinner. Although she lived independently, Sydney frequently returned to her parents' house. Sydney had been battling depression, feeling that the medications she was on were actually making her condition worse. Her mom, Susie, was deeply concerned and urged her to see a new doctor, who prescribed different medications. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney's voice sounded increasingly optimistic as she reported that her mental state was improving. She was attempting to make positive changes in her life, including searching for a new job, as working in a store didn't fulfill her ambitions. However, she was still uncertain about her career goals, which contributed to her feelings of depression. By November 2017, Sydney's mental health had taken a turn for the worse, leading her to take antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Despite her family and friends offering support, she yearned for romance and love. As a young modern woman with an interest in the same gender, Sydney sometimes turned to social media to find potential dates. To expand her social circle and find a friend, she used Tinder, a popular dating app. In November 2017, Sydney met a man named Aubrey online, and they started exchanging messages. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common, including a love for gambling, hiking, and good food. After just 100 messages, they decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney visited Aubrey at his home in Wilbur, and their first meeting went really well. They hit it off and agreed to meet again the following day at Aubrey's house. Before their second meeting, Sydney worked her shift at the store, went home, and got ready. She even took a photo of herself and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." When Aubrey arrived, they drove off together. The next day, however, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was unusual for the normally reliable Sydney. Despite her high spirits in the days leading up to her disappearance, her family was worried when her coworkers informed them that she hadn't shown up. Sydney's mother, Susie, revealed that her daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When Sydney's parents went to her apartment, they were extremely surprised to find that she had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike the caring pet owner they knew Sydney to be. Concerned, they reported Sydney missing to the police. During a welfare check of Sydney's home, the police found the apartment locked and saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, the family remained adamant that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, Sydney Loof was reported missing after failing to arrive at her workplace, the Menards store showroom on 27th Street in Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that affected her gait, making her stand out in a crowd. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. According to her parents, Sydney told her friend on Snapchat on Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a man she met online the previous night and planned to meet up with her again that evening. Her car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and police conducted interviews, searching for any leads that could help locate Sydney. A massive search effort was launched to find Sydney, featuring highway billboards with her photo and a televised manhunt. Susie remained adamant that something had happened to her daughter after her date. To support her claim, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post by Sydney, captioned, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was planning to meet a woman named Aubrey, whom she met on Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace, which led them to identify a key person of interest. They traced Sydney's last phone signal to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Aubrey's residence, although they had no information about Aubrey's identity at the time. Authorities started looking for a man named Aubrey, who was the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. The problem was that no one knew Aubrey's real identity or if he even existed. Sydney's friend Brooklyn took matters into her own hands and decided to track down Aubrey using Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Aubrey's profile, and exchanged phone numbers with him. This allowed the police to finally learn Aubrey's real name, which was Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman. Further investigation revealed that Bailey lived in an apartment near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Bailey shared this apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell, from a normal and wholesome family in Lyons, Iowa, grew up as a friendly and successful student who excelled in basketball and running. However, following her father's death, her life took a downward turn. She started keeping bad company and got involved with alcohol and illicit drugs. On a dating website, Bailey met Aubrey Trail, a man with a history of fraud, issuing fraudulent checks and theft. Aubrey had created a cult where he referred to himself as the Vampire Daddy and paid women $200 weekly to follow his unusual rules. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey faced a court order to pay over $40,000 in fraud reparations and had multiple misdemeanors against them. On November 19, 2017, they went into hiding. When police searched their apartment, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which a neighbor confirmed. After a few days, the police located Aubrey and Bailey at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, and took them into custody a few weeks after Sydney's disappearance was reported. A thorough examination of phone records and Bailey's location data led the police to the gruesome discovery of Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered, with 13 parts found in black plastic bags in ditches in Clay County. Tragically, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improperly disposing of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all three charges. Aubrey, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but guilty to improperly disposing of human remains. However, Aubrey's various statements were inconsistent, and he often appeared confused, changing his account of events and introducing new characters. He made bizarre claims, including that he was a vampire who could fly, and spoke about witchcraft. Aubrey claimed to be a cult leader and vampire, telling authorities he had witches in the cult who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. In one of his early court hearings, Aubrey admitted to killing Sydney Loof, but said it was an accident. He claimed to have paid Sydney $5,000 to participate in a threesome with two other women, which Sydney had agreed to. However, during the act, he strangled her with a cord by mistake. Aubrey also confessed to cutting Sydney's body into pieces, a ritual according to his beliefs, to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place. He believed this would help her reincarnate faster. However, the prosecution presented evidence contradicting Aubrey's story. Surveillance footage from November 14th showed Aubrey and Bailey checking into a Lincoln hotel near Sydney's home. The following day, they visited a home improvement store, buying a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used to store Sydney's remains. Furthermore, a surveillance camera caught Sydney encountering Aubrey at the Menards store on November 15th, unaware of the danger she was in. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof. Although separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the defense attorneys successfully argued that a fair trial would be impossible in Wilbur due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Sydney's death was a premeditated murder, as evidenced by the fact that she was strangled and that the crime was carefully planned and executed. The jury listened to three other women who had previously dated Aubrey and Bailey, all of whom they met through Tinder. Each of these women had been intimate with Bailey and had also been involved with Aubrey. One of them shared that she had even gone on a trip with them after they met, during which Aubrey gave her $200 a week and invited her to join his group, which he called Witches, telling her that she would have to torture and kill someone to become a member. Another woman testified that Bailey had discussed breaking her fingers and dissecting a body in detail, revealing her fascination with torture. The prosecution pieced together the events of the fateful evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney had arranged to meet a woman she had known for a couple of days, with whom she had been chatting on Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they drove around in his car. The car eventually stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was coaxed into the apartment. Once inside, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterwards, Bailey and Aubrey meticulously cleaned the apartment, which the prosecution argued was a premeditated act. The next day, November 16th, they dismembered Sydney's body and dumped her remains in Clay County. The court heard testimony from Jennifer, the landlord, who stated on November 16th, she drove into the garage and immediately noticed a strong chlorine smell that intensified when she entered the house. The medical examiner testified that Sydney's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of death. In addition to the missing organs, the upper left arm, from just above the elbow to below the shoulder, was also found to be missing from Sydney's body. The prosecutors sought the death penalty for both defendants, and if the sentence was deemed unjust, the case would be retried. However, Aubrey denied any involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying Sydney's remains. During his trial, Aubrey shouted that Bailey had no involvement in Sydney's death, claiming Bailey's innocence. In a dramatic turn, Aubrey then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade but survived and was detained until he made a full recovery. Aubrey testified he lied about Sydney Loof's death, admitting he met her in 2017 and paid her for illegal activities. He claimed Sydney died accidentally during an intimate act with an extension cord in November 2017. Aubrey confessed to dismembering and dumping her body, but maintained it was an accident, and he didn't seek help because he thought no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to getting rid of Sydney's body, claiming it was an accident from an extension cord during intimate act. Bailey denied involvement, with her lawyers saying she was also a victim of Aubrey's manipulation. However, phone records and location data proved Bailey's involvement, tracking her near where Sydney's body parts were found. The court learned that Bailey initiated contact with Sydney and arranged a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's duplex on the evening of November 15th to pick her up. The prosecution claimed that Bailey took pleasure in discussing cruel acts and enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented in court revealed a planned crime on the day Sydney was killed. Bailey and Aubrey went to Home Depot around noon that day, where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter, as part of their plan. Bailey sent Sydney a text message inquiring about her day, and phone records and surveillance footage show that she sent the message from the Menards parking lot, where Aubrey was also present. Sydney, who worked at Menards, seemed unaware of Bailey's presence. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, stating that she was at Sydney's apartment and would pick her up soon. However, phone records indicate that instead of going on a date as Sydney believed, Bailey and Aubrey went to the apartment where they lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence only showed that Bailey was guilty of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of Sydney's body by buying bleach in garbage bags. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell received a life sentence. The Loof family had waited 3 long years, grieving and yearning for their Sydney, anticipating a verdict that would bring them solace. Prior to this, on July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict Aubrey Trail of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. A 3-judge panel described his crime as cold and calculated. In the trial's second phase, determining whether he should face execution, county prosecutors secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail, fulfilling their promise. Consequently, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was put to death by lethal injection. Aubrey Trail, the con artist accused of brutally murdering Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly deceived his cult followers by claiming to be a flying mind-reading vampire with a coven of 12 witches. He claimed these witches gained their powers by killing people. Fortunately, in this real-life story, justice prevailed, and through the trial, the monster faced the end of his trail. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. 1986 was the year Belinda started her college education in her hometown. Unlike her twin sister Brenda, who attended Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed close to home. Her decision was largely influenced by her relationship with Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years her senior. Belinda was deeply infatuated with Marshall, and this relationship began during her high school years. However, Belinda's parents were not in favor of this relationship. They feared that being involved with Marshall would hinder their daughter's opportunities for a prestigious education. They also worried about the potential consequences of an early pregnancy, which might lead to Belinda dropping out of college altogether. The disapproval of Belinda's parents led to numerous arguments at home. Belinda's mother was particularly opposed to the idea of her daughter moving in with Marshall before marriage. She made her stance clear by stating, "He is nobody to you. Once you're married, you can move out, but until then, you have a home here." This remark seemed to only strengthen Belinda's resolve. In a bold move, Belinda and Marshall announced their decision to get married during a family dinner. Despite the tension, they shared their plans, which was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Belinda's mother was visibly upset but seemed resigned to their decision, gritting her teeth and remaining silent for the rest of the evening. In reality, Belinda had made up her mind to marry Marshall as a way to assert her independence and prove to her parents that she was capable of making her own decisions. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, invited a few close friends, and she and Marshall signed the papers. Afterward, they strolled around the city, enjoying champagne and each other's company. The next day, Belinda packed her belongings and moved in with her husband, who was still living with his parents. They hadn't planned to rent a separate place. Getting married didn't change much in their relationship. As mentioned earlier, Belinda's primary reason for marrying was to gain independence and stop her mother's nagging. However, her new life turned out to be quite unpleasant. Less than 6 months later, Marshall started spending less time at home, claiming he was working late. In reality, he was seeing another woman. Belinda discovered this when she noticed her husband acting strangely. One day, she waited until his work hours ended and followed him, which is when the truth came to light. She saw Marshall walking hand in hand with a woman she didn't know, likely a colleague. The deceived wife, Belinda, left her husband, Marshall, after discovering his infidelity. She didn't create a scene, but instead packed her belongings and returned to her mother's house. Marshall tried to win her back, but Belinda was too proud to forgive him. They eventually got a divorce. A few years later, Belinda was pregnant and working part-time at a school. Despite her pregnancy, she was concerned about missing the upcoming basketball competition between schools and not being able to prepare her team properly. Her colleague, Richard Bachman, didn't share her enthusiasm and had often expressed his disinterest in teaching. Belinda couldn't understand why Bachman, a 40-year-old man who seemed uninvested in his job, still held his position. As a diligent teacher, Belinda noticed that one of her students, Riley Joe Sanders, a high school senior, had been absent from class for months. She reached out to her colleagues to determine if the issue was specific to her class or if Sanders was a habitual truant. Her colleagues told her that Sanders came from a troubled home and rarely attended school, implying that his absences were not Belinda's problem. That evening, Belinda decided to take further action. She visited Riley Joe Sanders' mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious conversation with her. Although the talk seemed to have an impact, it didn't quite yield the results Belinda had hoped for. Sanders began attending class and participating on an equal level with his peers. However, during a basketball game, when Belinda called out Sanders for pushing an opponent and exhibiting poor behavior, he responded with insults and threats, warning her to be careful, especially in the evenings. After her breakup with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left for her in her hometown. She decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. It was there that Belinda found her true calling. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a basketball coach and had high aspirations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like her, he was a part-time coach but for soccer, and he also played for the university team as its captain. Soccer had been an integral part of David's life since childhood, and it was clear even then that he was destined to excel. He consistently performed well for his team, earning the respect of all his teachers. Despite his difficult nature, which could lead him to insult or even physically confront others, David's behavior was often overlooked because of his on-field performance. During games, he would become fully engaged and find it difficult to calm down for a long time afterward. However, one of his teammates later revealed that David's aggressive behavior was due to his use of steroids. David's behavior changed significantly when he was with Belinda. He became a caring and chivalrous partner, but with one major caveat: he would become aggressive and confrontational if he perceived anyone as a threat to their relationship. Belinda was well received by David's parents, who admired her love for sports, a common interest she shared with their son. However, Belinda's twin sister and friends were less than thrilled about her relationship with David. They had known Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person, but since being with David, she had become more subdued and focused on pleasing him. Her relationship with her family also suffered, with less frequent phone calls and visits, which naturally caused concern among her loved ones. As graduation approached, David and Belinda adopted a bull terrier named Shaq. After receiving their diplomas, they got married in 1999. January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. With the due date nearing, doctors predicted Belinda would go into labor within a couple of weeks. As with many pregnant women, Belinda was frequently exhausted, and caring for their son Evan added to her fatigue. One evening, David decided to give his wife a break from household chores and allow her some rest. To minimize distractions, David took Evan for a walk in the park. As they strolled through the fresh air, their hunger grew, so they stopped at a cafe for a snack. After their cafe visit, David and Evan headed home. Upon arrival, David noticed the front door had broken glass. He quickly told Evan, "I'm going to take you to visit Harland for a bit, okay?" Without waiting for Evan's response, David led him to a neighbor's house, where family friends lived. Evan, struggling to keep up, asked, "Why can't we go to Mom's?" David, unsure of how to respond, said, "Mom's in the hospital right now." The neighbor, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to unexpected visitors when David rushed past him, taking his son into the living room without a word. David then ran towards his own house, leaving Quentin confused. Quentin shouted to his wife to care for the child and followed David. "What's going on?" Quentin asked, but before David could respond, they reached David's house, where Quentin saw the front door was broken. Upon entering, Quentin saw the house was in disarray, with open closets and belongings scattered everywhere. A trail of blood led to the stairs, prompting Quentin to push David aside. Under the stairs, in the dressing room, they found Belinda lying face down with a severe head wound. David, seemingly in shock, didn't react. Instead, he took out his phone and called the police. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene, but they were initially unable to enter the house due to the Temple family's aggressive bull terrier, Shaq, who growled and barked at the unfamiliar men in uniform. One officer drew his gun in response, but David intervened, shouting at them to put their guns away and rushing to restrain the dog in the garage. Upon entering the house, the police assessed the scene and concluded that the perpetrators were likely burglars who had not expected Belinda to be home. Despite her pregnancy, they had shot her to eliminate her as a witness. When police started investigating a crime scene, they were baffled by how the burglar got past the fierce dog, Shack, that guarded the house. They were also unsure how the perpetrator distracted the dog. Upon closer inspection of the front door, police found broken glass, but its positioning suggested it was broken while the door was already unlocked, which seemed strange. Inside the living room, a box on the nightstand caught their eye, containing jewelry such as earrings, rings, and a gold chain. What puzzled them was why the thief left the jewelry untouched. As police spent more time in the Temple family home, they became increasingly convinced that the whole scene was staged. In their experience, thieves usually take all valuables they can carry, but in this case, nothing appeared to be missing. The presence of the dog continued to raise suspicions, leaving them feeling that something was off. Regarding the murder, Belinda was shot in the back of the head with what was likely a 12-gauge shotgun while kneeling with their back to the killer. However, shotguns are an unusual choice for robbers due to their bulk and difficulty in concealing and transporting. This, combined with the fact that the murder took place at 4 p.m., makes it improbable that a thief would be openly carrying a shotgun at that time of day. When questioned by police about firearms in his home, David mentioned owning a couple of rifles, which he showed to the officers. Notably, the shotgun that could have been used in Belinda's murder was not among the firearms he presented. David went to the police station voluntarily to give a statement and detail the items that had been stolen. Despite appearing nervous, he was cooperative with the police. During this time, his son Evan stayed at Quentin's house, oblivious to what had happened. In 1996, David Temple and Quentin Harland were neighbors and co-workers at a school. They were close friends and often socialized together outside of work, watching sports and hosting barbecues with their families. However, their friendship became strained when Heather Scott, a new teacher, joined the school. Quentin was attracted to Heather, but she rejected his invitation to dinner. What Quentin didn't know was that David had also developed feelings for Heather, and they started a secret relationship. Quentin was angry and hurt when he found out that his married friend, who had a son, was involved with someone else. Despite his feelings, Quentin kept David's secret, even as their co-workers began to notice the romantic connection between David and Heather outside of school. Heather didn't know that David was married, as he didn't wear a wedding ring and kept his personal life private. Belinda had no idea about David's secret life. She once confided in Quentin about her suspicions that David was cheating on her, but Quentin quickly dismissed her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he told her. "David is a devoted husband and family man. How could you think such a thing?" However, there were signs that something was off. David, who had once been extremely respectful towards Belinda, now frequently insulted her, even in front of others. He would call her fat, despite her only gaining a little weight after childbirth, and would often ask her to leave the room when they had guests, implying that her appearance was embarrassing. Belinda didn't stand up for herself or have a serious conversation with David about his behavior. Instead, she cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. David became increasingly estranged from his family due to a new relationship with a coworker. He put more psychological pressure on his wife, Belinda, and their communication consisted only of insults. Although he never physically harmed her, the verbal abuse continued. That year, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. The news made her forgive David's past transgressions, and she felt ecstatic. David attempted to appear as a happy father, but it seemed insincere. Sometimes, he would not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask why because she feared his angry outbursts and the potential scandal that could follow. A pregnant Belinda often asked her husband David for help in preparing for the baby's birth, such as running errands, fixing up the nursery, and installing shelves. However, David consistently ignored her requests, leaving Belinda to handle everything on her own, including shopping, painting, and assembling furniture, despite being 8 months pregnant. As Christmas approached, Belinda suggested discussing gift ideas with David, but he proposed skipping gifts that year to save money for the baby. Given the doctor's warning that Belinda might go into premature labor, this seemed like a reasonable decision. However, on Christmas, David didn't even get Belinda a small gift. Instead, he announced that he was leaving to spend the New Year's holidays with friends on a hunting trip. Belinda confided in her sister, who immediately changed her plans to be with Belinda, ensuring she wouldn't feel abandoned, especially since labor could start at any moment. David, during the holidays, spent the time with Heather, who wore a gold necklace given to her by David as a Christmas gift. By 2007, it appeared that David Temple had all but moved on from his wife's murder, as if Belinda had never been a part of his life. The fact that it had been 5 years since the murder and the killer had yet to be caught seemed of little concern to him. He had married Heather in 2001, and together they were raising Evan. The police suspected David of wrongdoing, but they couldn't gather enough evidence to prove anything. While investigating the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they discovered that a house on the next street had been burglarized 8 days before the murder at the Temple house. The perpetrator was none other than Riley Joe Sanders, a persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught, who had previously threatened her. He was called in for questioning immediately. Riley had no alibi for the day of the murder, and his father owned a 12-gauge shotgun. However, when the police searched the Sanders house, they did not find the weapon. Realizing the police had reason to detain him, Riley confessed that he was with friends on the day of the murder. He had hidden this information because they were smoking pot in a large group, and he did not want to implicate his friends. As a result, the charge against Riley was dropped. In November 2004, police officers arrived at David's doorstep, handcuffed him, and informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering Belinda Temple. David denied the allegations. His trial began in 2007. The investigation revealed that David's motive for the crime was his new relationship with Heather. Colleagues of David testified that during Belinda's pregnancy, he boasted about replacing his fat and pregnant wife with the younger and more attractive Heather. According to the prosecution, David killed Belinda as soon as she returned home from work, as evidenced by her still wearing her work uniform and shoes. They alleged that he then staged a robbery, scattering belongings around the house, before quickly driving to the park with his son to create an alibi. The prosecution also highlighted several suspicious facts, including that nothing was stolen from the house, and a fierce dog in the yard would have prevented any stranger from entering. Furthermore, witnesses reported seeing David's car stop near a rice paddy, where the murder weapon was likely discarded, with only his son Evan present in the vehicle at the time. However, the shotgun was never found in the area where the crime occurred. Heather testified that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious, and she didn't even love him. This statement introduced uncertainty into the jury's decision, as it raised questions about David's motive. Would he really kill his wife over a non-serious relationship, or was Heather lying to protect him? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, a friend of Riley Sanders came forward to the police to clear David's conscience. According to this friend, Riley had previously confided in him about taking his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home. Riley wanted to teach his teacher, David Temple, a lesson. Riley claimed that he had almost entered the house but was thwarted by a bull terrier that ran out of the garage. He shot at the dog but missed, and fearing the noise would attract neighbors, he quickly ran away. This new testimony was submitted to the court, prompting a review of the case. David was released from prison on bail while the review was underway. Meanwhile, Heather decided she no longer wanted to be married to someone who had spent so much time in jail and whose future was uncertain. She filed for divorce. The jury took a long time to deliberate on David's sentence. The case wasn't revisited until 2023, when David was still awaiting a final decision on his sentence. David was ultimately convicted and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Throughout the trial, his son Evan struggled to accept that his father was capable of committing such a heinous crime. Evan continued to support his father until the very end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Her family and early life are not well documented. She spent her childhood in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. Samadi attended a local school, where she demonstrated a challenging and conflicted personality from an early age. She had difficulty accepting rejection and often used force or deception to get what she wanted. People who knew her recall that Samadi's striking appearance and perfect figure made it easy for her to charm men, but she struggled to maintain relationships. Her beauty and charisma were matched by her greed and vanity, which led her to prioritize material wealth and self-interest above all else. This attitude often discouraged potential partners. Additionally, Samadi became intensely jealous and aggressive after brief relationships. Samadi's doll-like appearance led to her working as a Barbie lookalike at a large Universal bookstore for several years. This earned her a flattering nickname that stuck with her throughout her life. After high school, Samadi had in love with a successful local TV journalist named Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, who was 16 years her senior. Samadi had a long and serious relationship with Osvaldo, with whom she had 2 children, Christopher and Christina. However, due to constant scandals and jealousy, they separated in 2012. After Osvaldo's sudden death, it was discovered that he had not included Samadi in his will. Samadi took matters into her own hands and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent his relatives and heirs from entering. She also took some valuable items that belonged to Osvaldo. His family members were outraged and went to court to accuse Samadi of theft. The police eventually forced Samadi to leave the house, but she was not charged with a crime. Samadi had other relationships, including one with Miguel Angel Perez, with whom she had a daughter named Maria. This relationship was reportedly official, but ended in divorce after a few years. Samadi allegedly gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent, contradicting claims that she was unmarried at the time. Interestingly, some of her lovers have mysteriously disappeared or died under unclear circumstances, yet this trend went unnoticed for a long time. For instance, one of Samadi's lovers went missing shortly after deciding to end their relationship with the reportedly temperamental and aggressive woman. Despite relative suspicions of her involvement, his disappearance remains unsolved due to lack of concrete evidence. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadi. His murder was initially attributed to a botched robbery, but the perpetrators were never caught. Speculations about Samadi's role in the crime persisted, albeit without solid proof. Her most notable alleged victim was Gerardo Cruz, a Costa Rican native born in December 1992 in San Jose. Gerardo never knew his biological father, who left the family before his birth. His mother, Ana Patricia, later married Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted and raised Gerardo as his own. Gerardo's younger sister, Milena, was born a few years after him. He had a peaceful and carefree childhood and youth. Gerardo attended a regular school, enjoyed motorcycles, and met his true love, Carol, at a young age. By 23, he, Carol, and their 4-year-old daughter Genesis moved into his aunt and uncle's house in San Sebastian, a suburb of the city. Gerardo took a job at a local bakery to support his family. They were happy, especially with the news of a second child on the way. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samadi, a 40-year-old woman who regularly visited the bakery. She was attractive, fashionably dressed, and flirtatious. As Samadhi aged, she began to have relationships with younger men, likely flattered by their attention. Despite their nearly 20-year age difference, Gerardo became infatuated with Samadhi and started secretly meeting with her. She visited the bakery almost daily, catching the attention of other employees. Samadhi often brought her 19-year-old daughter, Christina, to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo balanced his family life and secret meetings with Samadhi without either woman knowing about the other. However, Gerardo soon let his guard down, boasting to friends and colleagues about his relationship with Samadhi, describing her as a terrific mistress who spoiled him with gifts. Rumors about Gerardo's affair soon reached his mother, who attempted to persuade him to end the relationship. The affair was short-lived, ending in October 2015, when Samadhi discovered that his mistress, Gerardo, was married with a pregnant wife and a young daughter. Upon learning this, Samadhi became enraged. She began harassing Carol, Gerardo's wife, with threatening calls and messages, warning her that Gerardo would be harmed if he didn't return to her exclusively. Gerardo apologized to his wife and reconciled, keeping their family intact. He underestimated Samadhi's malice, thinking she would move on and calm down after the breakup. However, Samadhi's vindictiveness was more intense than Gerardo anticipated. Shortly after the breakup, Gerardo witnessed a disturbing incident. While walking downtown, Gerardo noticed an older man secretly filming under a young girl's mini-skirt with his phone. Outraged, Gerardo took out his phone to record the scene. He then approached she, told her what was happening, and advised her to report the incident to the police. Gerardo chased the man for about 2 minutes, trying to get a clear shot of his face on camera. During the chase, Gerardo asked loudly if the man was enjoying taking photos of his sister's underwear without their consent. The man eventually jumped into a taxi and escaped. That night, Gerardo posted the video on his social media page, and it quickly went viral. Internet users identified the man as Luis Solmano Delgado, a former Ministry of Finance employee. As a result, Gerardo became a national celebrity, giving daily interviews to newspapers and appearing on TV and radio shows. He condemned Delgado's actions and stated that he had no regrets about exposing him. However, Delgado's lawyers began working against Gerardo, accusing him of violating the law by distributing the video. They prepared a lawsuit against him, which left Gerardo surprised and confused. He couldn't understand why he was being judged for exposing his actions, rather than the man being held accountable for his behavior. Gerardo's last interview was on October 7th at a local radio station. Feeling confident and believing he had nothing to hide, he spoke openly. The following day, Gerardo had plans to meet his friend Oswald after work, but he suddenly canceled, citing an unexpected emergency. It was later revealed that he had received a message from Samadhi, luring him to the park that evening under the pretext of another interview. Gerardo had no reason to suspect anything was amiss and trusted his former lover. After finishing work, he went to the agreed meeting point, but instead of journalists, 2 unknown men were waiting. They took his bag, assaulted him, stabbed him multiple times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. Before losing consciousness, Gerardo managed to call a friend and report the incident. The friend immediately alerted the police and medical services. Thanks to the swift response, Gerardo was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. He underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, they were unable to save him. Gerardo passed away on November 19th in the intensive care unit. Initially, multiple theories emerged about the crime. The first theory suggested it was a robbery murder. Gerardo was indeed attacked in a park at night, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife, which made it appear to be a typical theft. However, just a few days before, Gerardo had released a sensational video that compromised a well-known former government official, leading to a second theory, that the murder was an act of revenge. The media openly speculated that the former government official may have hired hitmen to kill the young man who had damaged his reputation. The murder sparked intense debate in the press, with protesters demanding that the perpetrators be caught and brought to justice. The police explored various theories, searching for other potential enemies of Gerardo. For months, the investigation stalled. However, in May 2016, a breakthrough came when footage from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The video showed two men fleeing the scene where Gerardo was fatally attacked. These individuals immediately became the prime suspects, and the police worked to identify and apprehend them. The footage proved to be crucial evidence, and once it was made public, the case started to move forward. It was repeatedly shown on news programs, with viewers asked to take a close look as the individuals could be dangerous. Police created rough sketches of the suspects and described their physical characteristics. One of the suspects soon came forward, hoping that cooperating with the investigation would lead to a reduced sentence. The information provided by the cooperating suspect led investigators to several accomplices and the crime's organizers, Samadi and her daughter Christina. All individuals involved in the crime were eventually taken into custody. Those arrested included Ronald Archie, a cab driver who helped locate the perpetrators, Cesar Chavez, a laborer who acted as an intermediary, and Omar Costa, a young miner who directly participated in the attack and had been tracking the victim on the day of the incident. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all parties involved through phone records and text messages. Samadi, who had meticulously planned the crime, had enlisted the help of her daughter Christina. Together, they recruited friends Ronald and Cesar to find hitmen to kill Gerardo, staging it to look like a botched robbery in a nighttime park. They were later joined by Omar, who was responsible for ensuring the victim went to the prearranged location. Samadi personally chose October 7th as the date for the massacre. On that day, she was in frequent contact with all parties involved, assigning roles and verifying that everyone adhered to the plan. Gerardo was attacked, stabbed multiple times, and robbed of his bag and jacket. These stolen items were later given to the police as evidence. The primary evidence against Samadi was a series of text messages detailing the murder plan and each participant's role. Samadi was so confident she wouldn't get caught that she didn't bother deleting the incriminating messages. Her motive for the crime was jealousy. She didn't want to share her lover with his wife. If she couldn't have him, no one would. She carefully planned the crime, involving her own daughter, who assisted her throughout. Samadi and her daughter were immediately arrested, with no possibility of bail due to the risk of them fleeing the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar, the youngest participant, who was handed over to juvenile authorities. The investigation spanned a year and a half, concluding in December 2017 when the trial of all parties involved in the criminal conspiracy commenced. It was revealed that Samadi had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior arrest for forging documents to obtain state benefits, for which she received only a fine. New information also emerged about Miguel Angel Perez, ex-husband of Samadi. It was discovered that Samadi had given their child Perez's surname without his consent. She then successfully petitioned the court to order him to pay child support, which he did for over 3 years. However, it was later uncovered that the entire process had been fraudulent. As a result, Samadi was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a substantial fine. During the trial, Gerardo's wife testified that she had been aware of his affair with Samadi. She stated that Samadi had threatened Gerardo with death, but he had not taken these threats seriously. The primary motive behind the crime, as previously stated, was Samadi's jealousy and wounded pride, stemming from her inability to accept that her younger lover had chosen to remain with his wife. Thanks to phone records, it was discovered that the mother and daughter had planned the crime together. Additionally, after the release of the CCTV footage showing the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was close to going to the police to confess. However, her mother calmed her down, assuring her that the investigation would not lead to them. The verdict was announced on January 23, 2018. According to the court's decision, Samadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Christina, Ronald, and Caesar each received 25-year prison sentences. One of the killers was sent to a juvenile detention center, and the other had not been found at the time. Omar, who had been stalking the victim, was acquitted. The victim's family was awarded $140,000 in compensation for their loss. After the verdict, the family expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment of Gerardo's killers. However, it soon became known that Samadi and Christina's lawyers had filed an appeal to reduce their sentences. As a result, each participant's sentence was reduced by 5 years. Samadi is currently serving her 25-year sentence in a Costa Rican women's prison.